Good evening, everyone. The work session of the Board of Trustees for the Spring Independent School District is officially called to order on Thursday, February 8th, 2024. The time is now 6:06 p.m. Trustees present are Trustee Adams, Trustee Correa, Trustee Durant, Trustee Jensen, and Trustee McDaniel. I would like to ask everyone to please turn off or silence your electronic devices. At this time, our Board Equity Committee lead, Natasha McDaniel, will begin the meeting by reading the Spring ISD Equity Statement.
Thank you, President Durant. Spring Independent School District strongly believes in educational and racial equity as fundamental aspects of its core mission and purpose, embodied through any program, practice, decision, or action that affects all students, with a strategic focus on those choices and policies that most strongly impact marginalized students. We believe all students, regardless of their ability, cognitive, physical, or social, emotional, ethnicity, language, race, religion, gender identity, and status, should have equitable access to opportunities, resources, support systems, and educational rigor in order to maximize their academic success and social emotional well-being. We believe every Spring Independent School District student is valuable and possesses individual strengths and characteristics that make our district a great place to learn and grow. Moreover, we seek to act on that belief, instituting policies and practices that value diversity, committing ourselves as a district to continued growth and development, and working to support the success of every student in all that we do.
Thank you, Trustee McDaniel. Our first order of business is a review of the meetings from our minutes from our previous meetings. Do any trustees have changes or corrections to our minutes from the January 4th, 2024 work session, the January 9th regular meeting, or the January 11th, 2024 special called session? Not hearing any, these items will be submitted as part of the consent agenda for Tuesday, February 13th, 2024 Board of Trustees regular meeting. Our next item are our superintendent remarks, and so at this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Dr. Lapita Hinojosa.
Thank you. Thank you, President Durant. And so good evening to all of those that are joining us online. Our link is live, so welcome. And those of you that are here today with us, lots of exciting things happening in the district. And I wanted to start off first by doing a special thanks to all of the volunteers that were out on Saturday. This Saturday, past Saturday, was our Boys Empowerment and Leadership Summit. We had almost 300 young men that came out. Many of them were brought by their parents. We had school buses that brought the young men over. We even had some young men that walked all the way in the rain because they wanted to make sure that they made it. And, you know, lots of volunteers were there, a lot of professional men with different careers. But most importantly, we had an amazing showing from the Divine Nine fraternities. We've always had fraternities there. This year it was impressive. Not only the young men that are in college, but also all those that are professional. And so our young men, our young males, had the opportunity to not only learn, go to sessions, but most importantly, get inspired and motivated in all the different careers and all the different possibilities that were out there. Special thanks to our own team that helped coordinate, and Dr. James out at Winchie, that was one of our co-sponsors, and Mr. Green, one of our behavior specialists. Also, I know you probably saw it online yesterday. Wednesday was the National Signing Day across the country, and we ourselves had our own group of young men and women that signed off. I know, Dr. Jensen, you were at all three signings, I heard. So you went from 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, all the way through. I know, Ms. Durant, you were also there. Mr. Adams, it's just an exciting time for our young men. And I know at our State of the Districts, I highlighted our student from Spring High School, our runner that was going to Iowa State. When you look here, you'll see that it was both young men and women. And I have to call out, we had an impressive range of schools here in the state and across the country. So University of Houston, University of Wyoming, Iowa State, University of Fort Lauderdale, Rice University, Columbia University, and if you'll recall, also Christian Nwazu that signed for Harvard. And so just a special thanks to all of our coaches, all of our teachers that make this possible, and our athletic director, Coach Oliver, for just an amazing showing yesterday and our athletes. As you know, for us, February is Black History Month. You'll see on your calendar we'll be having our district Black History Month program, but you also probably got an invitation from Marshall Elementary, and they're doing their annual event. And so just across the district, we are having different programs and celebrations in honor of Black History Month. And I do want to do a huge shout out to our theater group out at Dewitt Middle School, the Playmakers. They were at our principals meeting yesterday and did an excerpt of their performance. It was amazing. These were 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students that you would know they were 12, 13, 14-year-olds. An amazing program. So look out for in social media for all those events that are happening across the district. Just a way to celebrate Black History Month, and most importantly, African American figures that have inspired our students and continue to inspire all of us in our individual journey. Also, February is our Counselors Month. We, in spring, want to do a big shout out to our Spring ISD counselors, elementary, middle, and high school. This morning, I did have the opportunity to go greet all the counselors, and I don't know if Dr. Collins. Yes, Dr. Collins is here. You know, we were talking about and doing the analogy of a football team. And so when you think about a football team, the first, or to many of us, the first player that comes to mind is the quarterback. You see the quarterback, you think about any Kansas City Chiefs, you know, you think of the quarterback. Well, then there's, what's his name? Taylor Swift? No. I had to say that, right? But, you know, Dr. Collins was talking about the role that the counselors play in our schools. And yes, we have the quarterback, you think about the principal, all those important people. But we talked about our counselors as that left tackle. Somebody needs to be watching out for what is happening in the field, right? And oftentimes our counselors are those that are behind the scenes taking care of both the students and our staff. And so it was a good way to stop and think about the unseen, unheard, unsung work that our counselors are doing every single day. And so it was a great opportunity to celebrate them, and for me personally to thank them, because in a district such as Spring, we talk about all the work that we have to do, all that is compliance work. And as a counselor, so much of your work is compliance. But what we want to move to is commitment, right? Commitment to our students, commitment to the work that we're doing, commitment to our district. And I believe that our counselors, even though so much of their work is around compliance, do this report, fill out, submit, XYZ. They're truly committed to our students and truly committed to the work that they do. And so just a big shout out to our counselors this month and always for the work that they do. And then last but not least, just to remind everyone, we have lots of things happening in our district. As I said, our Black History Month is here in February. At the end of the month, we will be doing a meet and greet for our athletic director, Coach Oliver. We have counseling, as I said, this week, February 5th through the 9th. We have a Career Connection Expo coming up this Friday. And then last but not least, our continued partnership with our own education foundation. And we have a breakfast coming up on the 15th. But February is a month that's full of celebrations for us, and want to make sure that our community goes to our website. Very easy to look at our calendar, and you can see what's happening across the district every single day. And we ask you to stay engaged with us, stay involved, and show your support for Spring ISD. Ms. Durant, that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hinojosa. Our next item is agenda participation. This item allows members of the public an opportunity to speak on any items that are listed on tonight's agenda. So, Mr. Binkley, at this time, do we have anyone signed up for agenda participation?
No, Madam President, we do not.
Great, thank you. So for our next item, I'd like to recognize our Chief Financial Officer, Ann Westbrooks.
Good evening, President Durant, Dr. Hinojosa, and members of the board. This evening, we have our annual report on delinquent property taxes, and I'd like to ask our guests who are here with us this evening, Ms. Yolanda Humphrey, who is an attorney and partner with the Purdue Brandon Law Firm, as well as Mr. Justin Barlow, who is also an attorney with the Purdue Law Firm, to come forward and walk us through this report.
Thank you so much for having us tonight. Justin is my right hand, left tonight, but right hand for working your accounts. And so tonight he will be giving the presentation.
All right, are we queued up? All right, so good evening, Dr. Hinojosa. Good evening, trustees. So basically the way I like to phrase this report is this is Yolanda and I's report card. We have the privilege of representing you in your delinquent tax collection, and this kind of lets you know what we're doing and how it's going. So in the interest of time, I am going to try to get through some of the charts and information a little bit quickly, but if anybody has any questions, please do feel free to stop me. So getting started, this chart is a representation of all the accounts that we have for Spring ISD. So this is any account going back to, as early as the 1990s. So that total amount in base tax is roughly $6.5 million, and this shows you kind of where we are with each phase of the process for collecting those amounts. So moving right along, still talking about that.
I already have a question.
Yeah.
I forgot what bad address was.
Bad address is an address essentially where we thought, Dr. Jensen lived at 123 Main Street. She doesn't actually live there. Maybe she's moved her business. Maybe she's moved her address, her personal residence. So we're trying to do the research to get the address to, one, contact Dr. Jensen to either send her letters, make phone calls, anything like that before we move into litigation. So moving right along, this gives you a dollar figure breakdown of what the accounts look like. You'll notice that the 10,000 up figure is the largest figure at 31%. Reason for that is because we do have a lot of industrial accounts, business personal accounts in Spring. So those do add up in the base tax amounts. And moving right along, this shows you, again, going back to 2015 and prior, the amounts that we're trying to collect for which tax years specifically. And we will take a closer look at that just to kind of represent to you all that we do take those older years and we continuously work them. So at the onset, when we were given the 2017 tax year, it was originally $3.4 million. I'm sorry. Yes, the original tax year was originally $3.4 million. In the first year we had it, we were able to sit with it. We got 77% of that collected. And this just shows you the longer we're able to sit with it, the more we're able to get collected. Moving forward. Same kind of deal with the 2018. Obviously, it's less time that we've had to work these accounts, so it only goes up to a 4-year span. But it does show you in the first year 73%. Now we're up to 88%. 2019 started with 64% in the first year, up to 85%. And this would take us to our most recent year, being the 2022 tax year. We've been working these accounts since July of last year, and we're up to 58%, and obviously we're going to continue to grow that number and keep pressing forward. And so that's all we have for you today. Are there any other questions? And I do want to specify, if there are any suggestions, anything you guys have questions on, anything you think we can do better, please do let us know, and we'll definitely take that into consideration. Thank you, guys.
Ms. Westbrooks, I had a question about the delinquent. I may have asked this before, but is there any sort of a gap in funding for the delinquent taxes versus the timing when? Do we have an offset for the delinquent taxes, or is it just kind of I know it's like a net zero calculation at the end of the day, right?
If you're saying as far as how we budget and the fact, yes, so we're always budgeting for our collections to be closer to 97.5% to 98%. So we know that there are some in that current year levy that we're not going to collect. And once upon a time, penalties, interest, and delinquent collections would fill that hole and would still get us up to the current levy. That's not our scenario anymore. Now our delinquent taxes tend to be upside down, and we're doing refunds and waiting for the state to pay us the difference. So the long and short answer is that we budget for about 97.5% to 98% collections. So we're not anticipating those to come in that year. But as you know, each year you've got more that's coming in, then we tend to find ourselves whole for that year many years down the road. Yes.
And if I can interject, your tax office is great. They're great to work with, and they're collecting that 98% before we even receive it, so.
So even though that 2% may be Yolanda and I's world, it is, a testament to Ms. Dorsett and her staff on how much they are actually able to collect.
And Ms. Dorsett is here this evening, our tax assessor collector. Dorsett, so everybody knows who you are. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Mr. Dorsett, and I also want to thank Purdue and Brandon. We've had a very long-standing, successful relationship with you guys, and so we really appreciate all of your work and how collaborative you are with the district. I'd like to say thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
I'd also like to announce that Trustee Rhonda Newhouse joined us at 6:13 p.m. For our next item, I'd like to recognize our Chief of Innovation and Student Success, Dr. Matt Parasol.
Thank you, President Drain. Good evening, members of the board, Dr. Hinojosa, and all of those in our audience today. This item can be found beginning on page 45 of your packets. You will see that the actual presentation is on 46, and then on page 62 is the complete TAPER report, which stands for Texas Academic Performance Report. These reports are done at a district level as well as a campus level for all schools in Texas. This item we're presenting today actually goes beyond, with this formal presentation, the requirements. The TAPER report itself is the requirement, and that a public hearing is held. But in our work with our strategic plan, as we work to ensure that we're meeting our student outcomes, that we're ensuring equity for all students, and providing opportunities for students, specifically in college, career, and military readiness, we want to go a little bit deeper into the data with everyone today. And so what you'll see is similar to what we have presented in prior years as we look at those components within the deck. The TAPER report provides us data, looking at data disaggregated in a lot of different ways, specifically by different groups, different student populations, as well as across ethnicity. And it does provide us a comparison of where Spring ISD is in comparison to the region as well as the state. So as required, after it's published, we have 90 days to present the information for a public hearing. It was posted in December 15th, but the holidays that were closed, those do not count towards that 90 days. After our public hearing, we will also be posting the TAPER reports, individual and district, on our campus website as well as our district website. So the first thing we'd like to look at is the composition, ethnic composition for the 22-23. So some of this data is based on 22-23 school year. Some of it is based actually on the year before, 21-22. And so it is, we're looking at data that is from last year or for discipline and a couple other areas from 2 years ago. So as we look at this, we can see where Spring ISD falls compared to the region and the state. We do have a larger percentage of our student population that are economically disadvantaged, and that's defined by free or reduced lunch. We also have a larger English language learner population. And when we look at special ed, well, that number says 11%. I know our special ed team is here tonight, and they've been busy doing evaluations on students. We're actually up to 12%, so we're almost mirroring the region and in Texas now. As we look at Hispanic, we're about the same as the state, and we have a larger African American population than both the region and the state. The others are very close across the different areas, except for our Caucasian population is at 5%. Next, we'll look at STAR. So this specifically looks at STAR approaches or higher, so the passing of the STAR test. And so when we look at across Spring ISD, the region in Texas, you'll actually see that we are slightly above both the region and the state as far as our increases. We're continuing every year to close the gaps in alignment with our strategic plan. Actually, Houston, there was a recent study done by Good Reason Houston that even found that Spring ISD has closed and reached above the pre-pandemic levels at a higher rate than the vast majority of all other districts. We were tied with one, Galena Park, and so we have done a great job in closing those gaps.
Dr. Parasol, could you maybe in our board update give us that report, the Good Reason Houston?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Made a note of it just now. And so this was looking across our different ethnic groups. We'll also look next at our populations, student group populations. And you can see the similar trends, those upward increases in STAR across all economically disadvantaged, emergent, and special ed, about the same as what we're seeing in the region and the state. When we look at advanced dual credit course completion, this is based on the number of students who took dual credit classes and completed them. And every year, our numbers of students taking dual credit continue to increase, and we're very proud of that. And so you can see there that, again, just like the region and the state, that we're right in alignment with 44% for 21-22. And again, this is one of those numbers that does trail by a couple years. As we look at our graduate group, this is another point of pride that we have, is that you can see that Spring ISD outperforms the region and the state in our foundation distinguished level of achievement. So that means that students are earning an endorsement as well as getting 4 years of science and 4 years of math. And that's not a requirement for graduation, but it's that high level of expectation that we set forward for our students. And so that's the reason that our number is higher. Graduates in Texas, this is also a field that is lagging data with 2 years, and this comes directly from the clearinghouse. So you can see this on the left hand, there's two different charts. The one on the left is the percent of students enrolled in Texas higher education. And just to provide some clarity, not only do the students need to enroll to be counted in these numbers, but they must stay in school and complete successfully a full year. So we do have a larger number of students that enroll, and sometimes there's family situations, but those numbers, we continue to see growth. And so the other area is without developmental courses. And unfortunately, that is an item that has not been collected. And so it's not included. It hasn't been updated since 2018-19 by TEA. But that is the metrics that we do look at locally. And so it's something that we monitor as we work to help ensure that our students are college ready. It's why we've continued to increase our SAT testing, our ACT. We added ACT testing this year is during the school day assessment and for our TSI. And then if the board remembers, we also added Texas College Bridge, which allows students to take a course. Not every student is a tester, does well on tests, but they're able to take a course to show their readiness. And so through those scores, they're able to show the CCMR readiness and potentially not have to take a developmental course that first year. Spring ISD staff is the next area within the TAPER report, and it's broken down into groups by percentage. So when you look at Spring ISD, it's showing that we're 44.8%, which is less than the region and the state and the percentage of our staff who are teachers. However, you'll see that we have a larger auxiliary and also a larger professional support staff than the region and the state. And that ties to what we've heard from our teachers and the support that we provide through the different roles, whether those take the burdens off through the administrative auxiliary staff and supports or through the professional development staff or professional support staff such as our instructional coaches and other support staff. I did want to note, you can see there campus administration. We are in line with the region and the state as far as that percentage. Central administration, we are below both the region and the state in our central office staff. When we look at teaching staff by years of experience, you can see that we have a largest percentage of beginning teachers and teachers 1 to 5 years. And that's a challenge that we've had in Spring for some time. I know it's something that part of our strategic plan is that grow your own, and it's work that Dr. King and his team have heavily been working on in their recruitment of staff, as well as growing staff from within and retaining staff. And so we're working to change those numbers. And so that does show, with Spring, we do have a larger group and that less years of service. When you look at salaries, another highlight here is that regardless of which group, beginning year all the way up to 30 plus years, Spring ISD has higher average salaries than the region and the state. So one thing that brings to point as we think about the other data is that the salary that's our staff are receiving, on average is not the largest factor in the recruitment of those staff, because we are very competitive. In the last section that is part of the TAPER report, it looks at violent and criminal incidences, or part of the public hearing. There's 2 slides, and so these are all of the discipline codes, just the discipline codes that focus on violent or criminal incidences. You'll see that there is a count number, that's the total number of incidences, followed by the percentage, and that percentage is the percentage of the whole number of incidences that we have. So things such as, we know like the largest factor that isn't a violent or criminal incident is defiance of authority. That's where most students may have discipline infractions. However, that's not a violent or criminal incident. So it carries the larger number, but wouldn't be included in these tables. You'll see that there was an increase in PEMS Code 04, and that ties directly to what the state has seen and why they passed legislation requiring DAP placement for vaping. A lot of what is being found is that those vape cartridges contain products with the marijuana or other controlled substances. And this is the second set of those PEM codes. While PEMS Code number 41, fighting mutual combat, did increase in the number of incidences, the overall percentage decreased, and that's because all of the other areas that come into play. With that was also big work that the board led us to do as we reviewed the student code of conduct and began to address and put very serious consequences in place for fighting. And so we have already seen an improvement in that data for this year. Other required reporting is our accountability rating. That is still on hold due to the lawsuit. We were actually in a Texas School Alliance meeting yesterday, and based on the court proceedings, they do not anticipate a court ruling until summer, before the final court ruling is released. The accreditation status, we are accredited for 2023. Our first rating is superior achievement. And we had the last item is the campus improvement plans with the performance objectives. And if you remember, we presented those back in October after the STAR results were released in September. And that concludes the annual taper presentation.
So,
Trustee Correa?
yes. I was asking Dr. Hinojosa here before we started about the Region 4 numbers. And as I was kind of digging into them, I started looking at the size by enrollment, and I know it's a state requirement that Region 4 is now included in our report. But as I looked at the breakdown numbers, and this is more of just statement for awareness, there's 88 districts in Region 4. 40 of those are charter schools, and 48 of those are districts. And when you look at the breakdown by size, 39 of the charter schools are less than 25,000 students, and 34 of the districts are less than 25,000 students. So when you look at the comparison, there's really only 15 comparable schools to our district as far as size goes, one of those being a charter and 14 of those being a district. And so my question is, as I'm looking at our taper report, and just my own personal opinion, TEA is not really out to help us. It seems like the comparison from us to Region 4, that comparison is a little skewed, because we know that charters work on a different set of rules than public schools. And looking at the size, the majority of the size of the schools are all 10,000 or less students. So I would be curious to see how we would compare if we made it more of an apples to apples comparison to what we really look like to the schools that really closely represent our district in Region 4.
Yes, absolutely. We can we call those comparison groups, and we can put together some data regarding that. I know we've done it similar, and that's work that we do with our principals as well. They even have down to their comparison schools. Normally, that's also tied with our accountability system, where we look at those comparable schools. And so we can put together some data that, is there something specifically that you are interested in that taper report to see it that way, or all of the different data?
Just, yeah, nothing in particular. It just, from a public perspective, when you look at us and we're constantly comparing ourselves to this Region 4 group, and it looks like we're kind of trailing behind, now, are we really trailing behind when you look at the whole picture? So that's why.
It is a great point that it brings in all students, so that it acts as if the whole region is one district. And so it's not a fair comparison because there is such a wide difference. And we know the impact that economically disadvantaged has. Just having the resources, even things like a room to study in on your own. And a lot of our families and our students don't have that to the resources you have. And so when you're comparing, in that same group, you've got River Oaks and lots of other areas that there's more resources, and we can definitely pull that together because there may be from that. And actually, I know that there are some great celebrations beyond what we see just in this TAPER report.
Can you go to page 5 in the presentation?
Page 5?
It's page 5 on my page, or 50 of, yeah, that's the one. So this report is published by the Board of Trustees, correct? That's what the law says.
The TAPER report is published by TEA.
The annual report that includes the TAPER, that we are doing this hearing because the section of the Texas Education Code requires it.
That's correct.
This report is published by the Board of Trustees. So I'm asking about questions around the production of this report, and I'm wondering that the thing that is sort of sticking in my craw right now is our focus on approaches grade level or higher, and why that's the standard that we are examining here.
And so there are, as you'll see in the full detailed report, it does go into meets and masters.
Right.
And so for, one of the items that the board has challenged us with is to work to condense, with the data team, we love to get into all the things. And, I think, we could have 100 slides. And so we work to try to focus on the most important components, with approaches being the passing level for STAR. However, as far as the report itself, that's the piece that is legally required to present the TAPER. And I know our Jeremy is here as well with legal counsel who may be able to provide us more detail on any requirements on that.
So, for example, can everybody hear? 'Cause I don't
Mm-hmm.
think so. You need to turn it back on. You had it on.
Your light went on.
There
Mr.
you go.
Adams, the full report is what's published on the website.
Okay.
Yes,
So there is a document that contains the paper that has the full.
Yes,
And
I think your microphone is coming back. So yes, on the website, we are required to publish the full report, and then each campus will also have it on their website.
Okay.
And it is on page 62 of your packet, the full report.
Okay.
And that will be what's publicly displayed.
So my closer reading of the paper suggests some trends that are concerning. And I know that there are a lot of factors and variables that are impacting those trends, but I still have concerns. And it seems to me that we did great work getting more of our kids to approaches. They used to say to us when I was in the classroom that getting your kids to approaches is a poor indicator of their future success after high school. And that a minimum requirement for post-high school success on STAR was the meets standard, right? And so when I look at where we are on meets, it looks to me like we lost some folks that we're meeting and we're mastering. Now, there can be lots of reasons, it's a different test, and I look at the trends across the state, that happen to everybody, right? But my question was around, and Dr. Hinojosa just answered it, why the focus on approaches? Because I don't think that's where our focus should be. Our focus should be on getting our kids to meeting the academic standard. And if we're gonna do a hearing like that, if we're gonna do a hearing and have a public meeting, I wanna discuss what we're doing to meet our mission for our students, which is meeting academic standards and success after graduation.
And absolutely, that is the expectation. We actually had a meeting with our principals yesterday where our middle of year data was reviewed, and our principals engaged with our departments and action planning and worked to address that. And that directly followed our state of the schools that our assistant superintendents and central office team met to review that data. And part of that was predictor, so it was utilizing MAP as our middle of year and looking at what that predictor is for that meets, right? The on grade level or above. And so that is our focus. The only way with this, as we look at the redesigned accountability system, it puts much more weight and emphasis on that meets level. And so achievement is where we have to rise to. Growth will only carry us so far.
So I will say, and I will speak for myself, there are some serious flaws, I believe, in the STAR exam. The way it's administered, the way it's produced. I am much more interested in what those MAP scores look like and what our MAP results look like. So we're being judged by the state, and they haven't figured out. But for me, if I see growth in student achievement in terms of our MAP scores, which there is also a correlation between outcomes on MAP scores in future academic success.
Right.
I look at that a lot more closely than I do the results of the STAR in the EOC exam. So that's just for everybody's information in terms of what I take really seriously.
And we'll be sure to include that in the board update with the meets and masters, if you'd like to see the data that way from the TAPER report.
I would.
So we're happy to put that together, and we'll include it. And so that.
I'm
in more
eyeballing
visual
it in
form.
the taper, and if we're losing kids again, the instrument has changed. We didn't get any grace for that transition in the instrument. So I get there's going to be that shift, but I do think we have to take an honest and transparent look at what we're actually doing.
Dr. Dixon, do you mind if I jump? Because it's along the same lines of
Okay, sure.
Trustee Adams. I wholeheartedly agree that looking at meets, it's almost like you read my notes here, because approaches, they pass the test, but in terms of standards, meeting grade level standards, we know that that's not sufficient. So looking into the deeper report, if we go to page 64, and it's page 3 of the taper, looking at reading for grades 3, 4, I went 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So in terms of trends, just like Trustee Adams said, it looks like our approaches stayed about the same. Our meets saw some decrease, some stayed the same, but there were notable decreases when it came to the master's portion. And I also noticed that Region 4 has some similar trends, but to Trustee Correa's point, how supportive is that really for us? But my question was, the only grade level that I noticed that did see gains in meets for reading was 6th grade. So I'm wondering if there may be anything notable that could potentially be happening in 6th grade, or how could we replicate what is happening in 6th grade? Because that is from 3rd through 8th grade, the only grade level where meets increase significantly. And maybe this is a follow-up, maybe dive more into it, but that was a highlight that I noticed.
And you're also seeing, I think that one of the key ties to that is our high quality instructional materials. So Amplify and Carnegie. So those in Eureka Math. So we've utilized them now for 3 years. So you're starting to see the evolution of that increased rigor starting to show up in our scores. And I know Dr. Cuellar may be able to add to that some of the work that was tied last year for grade 6.
And specifically with reading, though, because that was my, literacy, that's my focus, so.
Oh, absolutely. I think with the consistency of our curriculum and us not wavering from it, I think we're going to see a significant trickle up especially in this year as we continue with the work that we're doing and the focuses that we're doing. I think there's a lot of variables too, Trustee McDaniels, that we can also look at as well, in terms of what could potentially be the reason for that. And I mean, that can be from a range of, even, how many new teachers do we also have in that specific grade level? In comparison to other grade levels that have more stability, where our teachers stayed. And so we do know that we've had a lot of teacher turnover, but that's been statewide. And so, I mean, for me, with you surfacing that question, I think I would be interested too to do a deep dive myself, to really kind of see, where we're most concentrated turnover areas in grade levels, because I know that would have a huge impact. Because, I mean, every new teacher that we get, we have to retrain and train up, especially utilizing our curriculum. So that's something too that's front in mind.
Yeah, just something to do some investigating, because if we're seeing successes in that area, then, maybe there's something we can replicate there. And then I'll step back and Dr. Jensen.
Well, I had two very distinctly different questions here. One is, we have a high rate of distinguished level of achievement, the foundation graduations. And I just wondered, does physical science and Algebra 1 count with those endorsements?
So those do, because of the 4 years. So those are both courses that are taken. So Algebra 1's a required course that students take, and they have a START EOC tied to that. But as part of those, the four.
That would count as a high school math.
Yes.
Okay.
As one of the four.
Thank you. The other thing is on page 73, I was looking for a ray of light and accomplishment in our kids' progress. And on page 73, the surprise to me, it was middle school. If you look at grade 8, English language arts and reading, and grade 8 mathematics, do you see how our district is higher than the state or the region? Are you looking at what I'm looking at?
Yes.
Okay.
Page 72.
This is page 73 in my notebook. And the upper chart, if you go down to grade 8, reading and mathematics, 2023, and you compare, the district has higher percentages of progress than the state or the region. And I thought our middle schools were just suffering. Can you account for this?
And so I will say that was also one of the findings from that Good Reason Houston report. Actually, that Spring ISD has had the greatest gain since 2019. We grew from 2019 pre-pandemic to have a 28% meets level on STAR to now we have a 47% meets level. We grew 19 percentage points, which is higher than any other district in the entire region.
I'll jump back into Trustee Adams' point. I also noted I will be curious to look at our MAP correlation to STAR, just because MAP is going to tell us more what's happening. I know this is the taper, hearing, but I think we know that STAR is just one day, one test, and so MAP is going to give us how our kids are really doing on a more day-to-day basis. But going back to slide number 5, we were just there with Trustee Adams. Number 5 on the report, or not the report, I'm sorry, the presentation. So these trends are very familiar. And historically, it tends to look this way. To Trustee Adams' point, we know that there are flaws in not only STAR, but in standardized testing, period. There are biases, cultural biases, that are at play, amongst other things. I guess I'm just naming that I would be curious to see how our work with cultural responsiveness in Dr. Ivory trickles into the classroom and how that does or does not impact our STAR data.
No, absolutely. It's that holistic approach that impacts every area for our kids. And I believe on Tuesday, is that correct, Dr. King? The board will receive an update.
From Dr. Ivory, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you repeat for me why the presentation focused on approach and not meets?
It was just the selection, with that being the passing. Approaches is passing for the assessment, and so that's why it was chosen as the metric to measure. However, when you look at meets or masters, you're going to see similar trends that you see here on this slide.
It's not just approaches, it's approach or higher.
That's correct. Yeah, so this shows approaches are higher. When we put in the board update, we'll also show meets are higher and masters.
I had just one observation on the incidents, page 13 and 14. When you kind of look at all of the incidents as a whole, it's either drugs or some sort of assault. And so my question is, you kind of touched on it when, one of the questions I was going to ask was the changes in the way we code incidents. Have you seen any sort of an increase in certain areas or decrease in certain areas, kind of based on the changes in the coding system?
And we can do an analysis for this year. I know this year we provided some great professional development through Dr. Orendando's team, as well as more detailed with the matrix and providing guidance to administrators on that coding. And so each of these are individual PEMS coded fields that do provide a description that administrators utilize. And so as they're going through, they're selecting the one, as outlined. And there is more verbiage. So as you can see, each of those have as described by this section. And so there's much more detail, which is what is provided in our administrator training for the coding.
And then my second question, when you're talking about looking at the students as a whole and seeing that the majority of what's happening with our kids is either drugs or some sort of an assault, are we looking at that from a big picture and kind of taking a step back and say, well, maybe we need to engage in some sort of a program, to bring to the forefront, are these kids that have gotten into this trouble, are they involved in the school in any way? Do they have, arts, PE, band, sports? Are we pushing everything to the kids as much as possible to keep them out of trouble? That's the question, because if they don't have anything to do, they're going to find something to do, and unfortunately, they end up on this list.
The answer is yes. Because we always want to focus on the whole child effort in terms of how we're wrapping around our students. Part of the discipline is also the restorative piece and the education and coaching piece and the support piece. So yes, all of our schools do a wonderful job at trying to engage our children. And the other part too, Trustee Correa, is I do anticipate, since this is last year's numbers, when we look at next year's taper, that we are going to see a significant decrease in these numbers as well, just because of our new approach to discipline. So I'm very, very, very confident that these percentages will almost be double in terms of the amount of decrease that we'll see, just because of our approach was specific to these pieces from the beginning of the year. So your answer, yes and yes.
We all go to page 10 of the presentation. It's the staff breakdown by type. So it's been said a couple of times, and I'm going to repeat it. The Texas data, I don't really see it as useful for us for comparison's sake. But as to Trustee Correa's point, there's also a lot of noise in the Region 4 data set. And so what would be interesting to me is to see spring compared, and we do this all the time. I know me and Trustee Durant do this. We pull out a sampling of the surrounding districts and similarly situated districts and do a comparison with that data instead of all the extra stuff and all the outliers that are in the overall Region 4 data that can skew these numbers quite a bit. I'm wondering for Dr. Hinojosa and the administration, if we see, as we approach budget conversations, any opportunities in the way our breakdown of staff is presented here.
And you know, one of the things that you will see in March is that ABL data. And they are able to do a breakdown that looks at the staff, at the courses, and then the expenditures. You know, if we're using 10 staff members, what's the result as far as the expense, the cost, and then it correlates it to the STAR data that we have available, to the test data. So I think the ABLE report will give us exactly what you're looking at. And then this is something that we've had conversations already with the principal. We've had conversations internally ourselves because we tend to provide more support staff, whether it's coaches, specialists, coordinators on the campus to support teachers, which is different than what the numbers are showing across the state. Many districts put more teachers in the classroom, less staff outside of the classroom. And we have historically had more staff out of the classroom. So the ABLE data will help us really understand that. Plus, now as we are looking at the situation we're in, we really have to analyze all the support staff that we've been having. And do we need all that support staff based on the data that we're looking at? And do we need to move some of that to the classroom?
Yeah, like I said, like the state data is, for our purposes, for comparison here, virtually useless because so much of the state is comprised of rural districts that have, you know, just really different dynamics in terms of what their staffing would look like. And like doing it by region is a little better, but there's a lot of extra data in there that pulls the numbers one way or another. So
I like the question, you know, earlier we were talking about, does it include charters? And when you break it down, I mean, it's half of the region are charter schools, and we know that they're staffed differently, and we know that the entrance requirement is different for those charters than what we have. So to be able to break it down to size, and then also looking at, you know, the needs. Because our needs are different than our neighboring district, right? So to be able to do that analysis is something that Dr. Parasol and the research team will be able to do for us. Dr. King?
And from the HR perspective, we can, in the board update, since it's dealing with staffing, we can just do a comparison of the TAPER data, the staff data for some comparison districts in Region 4. We can get a list of, I have some districts in mind, but we can confirm that list and get that to you in a board update so you can see it side by side.
And the Data Analysis Committee.
Yes.
I've been writing notes.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Parasol. For our next item, I'd like to recognize our Chief Financial Officer again, Ann Westbrooks.
Thank you. And so you should all have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation at your seats. We wanted to just start off this evening by going through some of our boilerplate information at this point that we've talked about several times as we've prepared ourselves for this 2024-2025 budget season. And so, as we know, we find ourselves in a budget deficit situation that we've been talking through and working through over the last several months. And so, of course, we know that's as a result of ongoing inflation, compensation increases that have been provided over the last few years, the impact that the pandemic continues to have on the school district, particularly related to the enrollment loss and the lower average daily attendance. And of course, we know that our ESSER funds are going away at the end of this year, and they're no longer available to offset the deficit that we find ourselves faced with. And so another point of clarification that's not up there, but I wanted to make sure that I make it clear, is we've also talked about the financial side of our medical plan, the district's self-funded medical plan. And so at the end of the January 11th board meeting, we talked about the board helping to advocate on behalf of the district to help have more options and opportunities with that medical plan. But I wanted to be clear that that costs that we're seeing and that we're dealing with our medical plan being underfunded is not a part of the budget deficit that we're discussing here this evening and that we've been discussing. With our medical plan, we budget for the district's contribution to the plan, the employees make their contribution to the plan, and then that's how much we have to pay for our administrative costs and our claims. So when that plan is underfunded for the year, when those costs are exceeding the revenue that's in the plan, then the district is funding that below the line with the transfer from our fund balance. So that's not a part of the picture that we have here. And I know we've talked a lot about the medical plan, and we've often talked about it in conjunction with the budget discussion. So I just wanted to have that point of clarification. And then also as a reminder, the board did vote on the interlocal agreement that we have with TASB now, and Dr. King and myself are working behind the scenes to bring forward some options to help right-size that medical plan and hopefully stop that underfunding that's happening there. So just a point of clarification as we continue to work through this budget.
Chief Westbrooks, I want you to know that Ms. Hodges and I, especially Ms. Hodges, tried to present this at our grassroots meeting last night. And we were told, no, that was a grassroots meeting for priorities. And on our chart here, we get to bring this forward as a resolution beginning in March. Okay, we're on it. Okay.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Okay, so again, some information that we've seen quite a bit over the last couple of meetings, but just want to keep it top of mind as we continue to work our way through this process. Here's just a look at our 2022 budget, 2022-2023, and our 2023-2024. So we know when we passed our budget for the fiscal year ended 2023, we had a $35.4 million deficit. We're utilizing those ESSER funds to help offset that deficit, using $20 million of ESSER funds in the 23 fiscal year. Then when we move into the 23-24 fiscal year, the adopted budget now had some of those approved budget reductions were included. And we had a budget shortfall of $25.3 million in this current fiscal year. And again, we're able to offset that deficit with our ESSER funds. So just a look back at where we are and what's taken place and just where our starting point was. So of course, our starting point as we began to work through the budget reduction for 24-25 was this $25.4 million. So again, just to look at those approved reductions that took place in this current year in 23-24. That total is $9.2 million, of which, as we've discussed before, $1.7 million were related to the central office. At the January 11th board meeting, we brought forward the proposed reductions from the 4 subcommittees, and we had our principals and our central office team come in and present those reductions. The total reductions that were presented were $11.9 million. At that time, we received feedback from our board, and we removed the proposal to return to the 2-mile transportation. We put the school interventionist at the high schools on hold pending some additional information from the principals. And so on Monday, you all received a copy of that information electronically from our high school principals. We also, at the time, put the proposal of reducing the CTE teachers at the high schools by 1 position on hold pending the results from the ABLE study. And those results will be provided to the board at the March board meeting. The last item was the central office reductions, and we were asked to bring forward the Edunomics grid with the details related to the items and the amount of the central office reductions. So this is just a look back at that excerpt from the secondary proposed reductions with the 2 items, item H and item I, that we had on hold. And so we know that we're still pending the final information with the ABLE report that, as I mentioned, will come forward in March, at the March board meeting, but we did want to have a moment to ask the board if you have any additional questions related to the 2 high school interventionist positions, and to see if we would be able to remove the hold on that item this evening. And you do have a copy of the proposed information for the high school positions in your folders as well.
Do we have a copy of that? I didn't bring it with me.
We have it, you have a copy in your
I
folder?
thought this was for the central office. This is everything?
This is central office.
Right.
Central office is that one. This was from last
Correct.
month, and so we do have it. If you want us to project it, we have the full document where we can project it this evening. But we didn't provide a new copy of it.
So, one, can we get trustee Hodges a copy of the red folder? You can have mine.
Okay, never mind.
Okay. So I thought we had some, not answering your question, but I thought we had some concerns. Weren't there interventionists at the elementary level? We wanted to know how they were going to be able to identify and work with their students that needed additional support.
When we walked away on January 11th, we had 3 items that were pending information or to be removed, and it was the 2 on the screen, the interventionists at high school, the CTE, and then the buses. The question was brought up that evening, and the elementary principals in the room addressed it as far as how they were planning to utilize existing staff to take up those responsibilities. But if there is some additional information that you still need, we can go back to the principals and get that. But we left with items HI and the school buses as the only items that needed to be removed or on hold.
Chief Westbrooks, was that where the principal spoke about how she had kind of pilot tested that?
The item you're referring to
Which
is
one?
the assistant principals at middle school.
Correct.
Okay. I don't remember the
It was
elementary.
the student support specialist. They said they were gonna utilize the student
And
support
you had
specialist.
several questions
Yeah, I was
about it.
asking about if they also do behavior and academics, if they could still support. And they said yes.
I'd like clearer information on how that's gonna work.
Clear information on the elementary
Yes.
and how they're planning to do
Correct.
theirs?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So that item we did not have on hold. So are we going back to put it on hold and then bring forward information?
Ms. Westbrooks, I also, and if you'll double check for me, but I think the elementary interventionists are all the ESSER funded positions.
No,
How
ma'am.
many are ESSER and how many are?
The elementary, to put the interventionist is state comp ed funded, not related to ESSER. So that one was not, we didn't walk away that evening with that one still on hold. So if there's additional information, we can certainly get that from the principals, but we didn't discuss the ESSER interventionist. The reduction list was only related to general funded positions.
I didn't bring that list with me, so I can't.
And we have it. We can put it up on the screen. Mr. Sheffer has it available and ready, so we can scroll through it if we need to. The other one. Yes. Thank you. And am I controlling it right now? Okay, thanks. So the item we're referring to is item C.
Do have it.
Oh, Jason, I'm making it bigger on my screen, but they can't see my screen. Can you make it bigger so item C is a little easier to see?
I do have it. Good.
It's item C, and that was, scroll down, oh, I can scroll, thank you, right here. So this was the interventionist position, one per campus. It's state comp ed funded, and this was presented by Dr. Amerson, and she talked through the committee's recommendation and how they would utilize the existing staff. And to Trustee McDaniel's point, you'll see in column F is where they refer to utilizing the student support specialist position to help with some of those duties, and they felt as though they would be able to make that happen.
We just went through the taper report, and I'm really struggling with where we have positions in place to intervene with our students that need that additional support. I'm just struggling with removing that out of, as part of these budget cuts. I think if we're going to continue to see the growth, if we're going to identify our students that need that extra help, that we should not be removing interventionists at any level. I'm not in support of it. So I don't know if it's on hold or not, but I'm not prepared to approve a budget that's taking away interventionists at any level that are on our campuses to help support and identify our kids that need extra help. And that's for me. I think we have an opportunity to look at other areas to identify where we can meet that deficit, but not at the expense of supporting kids that need extra help.
Can you go back to the high school interventionist, please? So just to clarify, this correlates with the packet for high school principals reduction.
That's correct. So
Okay.
we asked the high school principals to identify which positions they would put, and they've actually updated a couple of those since we prepared it and sent it to the board. But that was in response to this item being put on hold, yes.
And if I'm looking at this,
in looking at this, it indicates that some principals have that position, but they don't have a person there. So they've been doing without a person, a body, doing this position. But the position has been listed on their budget as having, when they actually haven't had one. So they're okay with not, with removing this FTE from their budget, because they haven't had it anyway, and they've been doing this. And they've been making good use with what they have by, changing things around in the school, changing personnel around. So it looks like, from what I'm looking at here, the principals are okay with, reducing this FTE on their campus.
Except that the
And
student.
I
can
would say
accept
the
that.
committee was okay. I would really like to hear that from the principals at the elementary level as well as these principals here. Not the one that was on this committee. I need to feel comfortable that they're all on board with this. So saying that they're all right with it,
Well, the committee worked together and they represented their principals and they also talked to the principals. And we're honored this evening to have Ms. Warford as well as Dr. Amerson in the audience. We don't have all of the elementary principals. We do have the assistant superintendents from elementary back there that can speak to it as well. But without taking a vote from each of the principals, we have been relying upon the work of the committee and that communication with the assistant superintendents and the principals to walk us through this process. So we do have Ms. Warford, who is an elementary principal at the time, and Dr. Amerson, who is one step off the campus. And so if you would like to hear from those two individuals, I'm sure, Ms. Warford, you're used to this by now. I'm sure they wouldn't mind coming up. She's looking at me like I didn't know that, but
While she's coming up, so we've budgeted for this position but haven't staffed it at the high schools. The student outcomes kind of reflect that. I mean,
that doesn't mean that the position has been vacant every year, all year. It means that some of the ones who've put the position on the docket are saying that at this time that position is empty or is vacant. So that doesn't mean that none of the positions have been filled. It just means that at the time that particular campus may be without it. And to Trustee Newhouse's point, they've been able to fill that gap some way, somehow. But I'll turn it over to Ms. Warford if you want to speak on behalf of the elementaries. Ms. Walker is here and has been working hand in hand with the high school principals. I don't see any of the high school principals here, but we did have them in the room on January 11th.
And,
Oh, I'm sorry. Stacy's here.
and Ms.
Smith
Westbrooks,
is
and,
here.
and I'll tee it up really quick too. And Ms. Warford and Dr. Amerson played an integral role. We did meet with principals recently and really went through some exercise and activity to talk through them. You know, what are some possibilities and opportunities for us to do some job consolidation? How do you feel about this? We did work with every single elementary principal that Ms. Warford and Dr. Amerson and Dr. Harris facilitated. At the same time, trustees, we also had the secondary principals meeting as well as a group, looking through the individualized plans. One of the things that the board did request at the last budget work session was that we knew at the high school level especially that this was going to look different per high school in terms of what the impact would look like and how we would be able to, the FTE would look different as well, which is reflected in the high school plan. We did sit down with the high school principals and go through each of it individually, working through each plan. So I do want to also assure the board that we did work with them. We took their feedback in terms of what they felt was going to be best for their kids. But with that being said, I'll go ahead and let Ms. Warford talk a little bit about that meeting with the principals and some of the discussion that transpired.
Good evening, Justin, President Durant, members of the board, Dr. Hinojosa, good evening. We did a number of things to ensure that all of the principals, all 25 of my colleagues were on board with the decisions that were brought forward by the reduction committee. We started by looking at the current SSS job duties. So I was asked to put together a spreadsheet every single principal filled out that spreadsheet and talked specifically about what their SSS did on their campus. When we looked at that, we found that there were several different variations of what the campuses were utilizing that position for. So we, under Dr. Cuellar's assistance, Dr. Harris, Dr. Emerson, and I facilitated a meeting 2 weeks ago with all of the elementary principals. So every principal was there, was represented in the room. We looked at that spreadsheet and we came together as a team and discussed what were the top 5 elements that the student support specialists needed to continue to keep on their plate. And so we discussed that as a team. We came up with a collective top 5 things that the SSS needed to do as far as for compliance, and then as far as for instructional purposes. We also discussed at length a action plan for how we would start to delineate those other job duties, who could perform those other job duties that we were removing from the SSS, because we felt like if we were adding additional time for them to intervene with students, we wanted to make sure that they had the time available to do that. So who else could take over those job responsibilities? And then the principals also came together as a team and decided the actual schedule for the SSSs. What part of their day would be the compliance piece and what part of their day would be the instructional piece. Also remember, Dr. H's charge to us was we would have a reading interventionist and a math interventionist on the campus. So the SSS would be in addition to those 2 positions, one of those being paid out of title funds and then one of those also being paid out of SCE. So in essence, we have 3 people who will be intervening with our students in reading and in math. We left the meeting with a consensus on that this was doable and that as a team we could work together to actually make a physical daily schedule for them. And then we also started revising that SSS job description so that we can send that out not only to the SSSs but to the campus principals to ensure that we are still all on the same page. The meeting was extremely productive. We got great feedback from the other principals. Even principals that I spoke to yesterday felt like the meeting was extremely productive and that they could start to see the vision for how this position could be realigned to ensure that our students were getting what they needed.
What pushback did you all get?
I'm sorry?
What pushback did you get from principals?
What feedback?
Pushback.
Oh, pushback. It wasn't necessarily pushback at all. It was just the need for them to understand how it could be facilitated on their campus. It was never a piece of pushback. It was, okay, how do we do this? And so the meeting was around developing an action plan for how it could be done.
And is that action plan developed?
I'm currently working on that right now. Dr. Cuellar has asked me to put together a schedule for what the day could look like. We actually decided as a team that they would be 50-50. So part of their day would be DPMs and compliance pieces, and then part of their day would be intervening. We also decided that on certain campuses they would flip-flop that. So maybe the AM at Cooper is instructional and the PM is compliance. At McNabb it may be different. So I am going to put together a skeleton schedule for them, but also knowing that on different campuses there are different needs for when that person would intervene depending on the principal's job assignment for them.
And President Durant, I do want to preface also that all of this feedback was collected by the principals. So we collected all of the feedback in terms of what the revised job description would look like based off of their feedback, and also based off of what their duties would look like during the day in terms of what Ms. Warford was saying. If it was 50% focusing on students and the other 50% on compliance, That was also the majority of the feedback from the elementary principals as well, in terms of a preference of what a day-to-day schedule would look like.
Okay, so let me make sure I'm clear that there is a reading and a math interventionist along with an SSI. SSS.
Yes, ma'am.
So there's 3 positions
Yes,
at each elementary campus to support intervention.
yes, ma'am.
And the one that's on row C here, item C, would have been a 4th position that we're recommending
Yes,
be
ma'am.
eliminated.
Yes. And I just will say that I've been at McNabb for 9 years. We didn't initially, that was the structure. The additional interventionist that we're talking about with SEE was added at a later date. And some of the, we like to say experienced principals, some of us call us old. We actually operated under that structure and were successful with that structure.
Okay. I don't want to come across like I don't appreciate all of the work that's been done, and that we had a committee that was very collaborative. But we just went over the taper reports, and I'm not happy with where our kids are. So when you start talking about eliminating interventionists and things along those lines, that gives me heartburn. So not that I don't trust the committee or whatever, you know, what's going on. I have to look, I've been elected by the community to speak for them. And right now, our students aren't where they ought to be. And to me, we have other opportunities we need to look at from a budget perspective without eliminating those key positions that are strictly focused on intervention. So that's where my heartburn is with the item at all.
The other thing, Ms. Warford, will you also talk about the review of the job description for the reading interventionists or reading specialists, math specialists, and the SSSs? I think that's a big piece of the discussion that the principals had. Sometimes you have so much overlap in roles and responsibilities that we don't really know who's responsible for what work.
Absolutely. And especially with the SSS job description, there were a lot of administrative responsibilities that some of the SSSs were taking on that can be given to other members of the team, and that honestly should be shifted back to students. So over the years, honestly, I just think that the job description has gotten skewed. And so with looking at that Excel document, we did notice where there were places that some of the newer principals that didn't know had used them in a different way than they were originally utilized for. So that was where that collaboration came in of talking about, okay, what are the things that this person really should be doing? And when we did that, we discovered that they do have time in their schedule every single day to be intervening with students.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Warford. And was there another question? I'm sorry.
Right, so.
I think, so I'm gonna just sort of piggyback on what you just said, right? And I'd have to look at the taper data more closely, but my recollection, and correct me if I have this wrong, but when a child approaches, we're required by law to provide intervention. Is that correct? We're not. So it's when they don't meet the standard?
Right. And of course, the principals will tell you if they're at approaches, we've already put them on a list and they're in a group, and we do, and yes, those are your bubble students, and we do group
There's no legal requirement, that's what I
There's
was
no
wondering.
legal
Okay,
requirement. It says if they failed,
Okay.
then there is the legal requirement. And House Bill 4545 was originally all subjects. The new bill that just came out was focused on the reading and the math. And that intervention, the 30 hours needed to be provided during the day. In spring, we do much more than that. And we actually have it worked into our schedule, daily schedule. So the students are grouped. If they failed the STAR exam, to make sure we get the required mandated, and then, of course, we use other data to continue to intervene. But by law, it's only those that failed, and we're required to provide only 30 hours. But
Okay.
we do much more than that.
So
That's
that
the
makes
law.
my argument less compelling. But I still will say that if our kids are not meeting the academic standard, then I feel like we have a duty to provide intervention. And so what I'm hearing is, with the staffing suggestions from the committee, we can meet the requirement for that intervention. So I just want to be sure about that, because I keep hearing that we are either not staffing a position that we need for intervention, or we're staffing it and then the people are being used for administrative duties and bus duty and whatever else, but not helping kids who need help get the extra help, so.
And I do believe that that's, the focus of the committee and, all the principals and teachers that were there. I mean, we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the kids. At the end of the day, we don't want to eliminate a position that has a direct impact with students. And we also realize that we've gotten comfortable with the additional funding, Ms. Warford says the old principles, right? But it's, those of us that have learned and understood how to use our staff, and you focus on their roles and responsibilities. We've had, and you can see from the TAPER report, that we've added a lot of support staff. And sometimes we end up overlapping. This is going to make us be more streamlined and focused on whose responsibility it is to intervene for reading and whose responsibility is it to intervene for math. That was our discussion yesterday. We need to know who at each campus is responsible for this specific group of students. And then, of course, with the progress monitoring, how do you group the students? How do you document and demonstrate that they've mastered the specific skills that they need, and how do we continue to grow them? At the end of the day, we do not want to, by any means, eliminate any position that is working with students that would hurt or deter any progress being made. We believe that by clarifying roles and responsibilities, updating those job descriptions, working with our principals to make sure they understand the scheduling, because it is all about scheduling and how do you move kids through, that we will be able to do that work. And when you saw in that, the grid, I know we had it up a little while ago, that we need to continue to monitor that work, right? So if we eliminate this additional staff, what's the risk? And so the risk may be that our students are starting to struggle. That needs to be monitored along the way, because if we do realize that we get into the end of the 9 weeks or the end of the semester and we're struggling, we've got to do something. It can't be that we eliminate the position and then just keep moving. I think that was the beauty of the grid, that it made us put the stake in the ground to say, what are you going to do? What's the risk, and how are you going to monitor, and what are you going to do if the outcome is not positive?
I guess a piece of the issue for me is, I know we're looking for the results of the ABL work, and like that'll be a powerful tool if we're able to utilize that. But to your point you just made, Ms. Warford is a veteran principal, and we've been turning over principals. And so we don't have a lot of Miss Warfords walking around in the district that can properly utilize their staffs. And so we're going to be leaning on Miss Warford or the ABL project, Mr. Reynolds, those folks, to make sure that people are where they need to be to support students. And so that'll be the accountability piece for all of us at the end of this.
And when it comes to accountability, I'm wondering what data do we have to measure how well our interventions are working? Like our students, when it comes to response to intervention, they should be going in, getting support, and coming back out. Are they staying year after year in receiving interventions? Like how effective? I would like to see that data to see, how is it working and what is the impact? Because sometimes we can have a slew of interventionists, but does it show the making the impact that we really want to make? So.
And that data is certainly the data that we track. I see Dr. Emerson, Ms. Warford, Dr. Harris all nodding, because that is the work that we need to be doing. A student should be in intervention all year long, and you just keep doing the same thing.
Right.
It's the quick burst that the program offers, and so we're supposed to be able to intervene, work really hard with them and push them on out. The next group of students come in. That's a successful intervention cycle with a successful interventionist in place.
Because just put it in a frame around it. The taper is one data point. We have to look at multiple data points, thinking about how kids are really progressing. So just to reframe, because I know it's statewide and we have to report, but it's just one snapshot and it's not the full picture of how students are really doing. I've had kids that would fail the STAR, but they've made significant gains across the school year. So it can't always be measured in just the data, the taper.
I'm sure this goes without saying, but I just want to ask the question just for clarity, because Ms. Warford brought up a good point. Sounds like there's a silver lining in this process, in that now we've kind of, what's the word? Not streamlined, but clarified the role and responsibilities of this position, right? It sounds like we were utilizing it for other things. And so the question is, I would assume and I would hope that we're doing the same thing for all of our other positions, because I would imagine if this is the only if this happened in this situation, how many times is it happening in other positions?
Absolutely. One of the things that we did discuss at our principal advisory committee is, we have 8 new principals that came into our system, but 8 new principals are already walking into a fixed staffing and fixed schedule. And so when you walk in to only knowing what you know, and that's the schedule that you have and the staff that you have. So how it's being utilized is what they're walking into. So part of the conversation is how do we continue to train, educate, and professionally develop our new leaders around what staff utilization looks like. Also gives us an opportunity from a central office standpoint to completely recalibrate, look at our job descriptions, and make sure it's directly aligned to where the most value is for kids. So there is no wiggle room anymore. There is no flexibility. This is what this position does. This is how it will be utilized. And moving forward, we actually have a standard. So a lot of that conversation came up. It gives us a great opportunity to do just that. And I think now is the perfect time.
So, Ms. Westbrook, let's get back to your questions on the holds. Did anybody else have any? Okay.
Are we talking about the grid? Or did we pass that? I had a question on one of the line items here.
Oh, go ahead.
It was just a statement that I saw on, oh gosh. Child nutrition.
Trustee Correa, are
Yes.
you on the central office one, or, okay, so can we bring, I apologize, can we bring clarity and closure to the campus one before we
Sure.
go to central office? Because did you still need to hear from the high schools? And so the reason why we're putting an emphasis on getting these nods from the board early on is so that we can put these plans in place and fully utilize this time to make sure that we are ready for the 24-25 school year. And so the principals need to know what the staffing is going to look like, and that's where we're trying to get to, so we can get their budget staffing meetings done. So we really want to walk away from these meetings with clarity for them, so that they can plan and move ahead.
The trustee.
And I agree with that, and I understand that ask. Historically, since I've been on this board, we don't get numbers before April. So we're way ahead of the game right now. And I do understand that we want to move as quickly as we can because we have a bigger deficit than we do typically. But I don't want to rush the board into a decision when they still want to do more research and are more comfortable with it. So I want to just make sure that we understand Ms. Westbrook's concern to give our administrators as much lead time as possible. But we're actually way ahead of the game by being here in February.
Trustee, President Durant, I just want to I totally echo what you're saying, right? Because this is not a decision we want to rush.
Correct.
One of the things that, from the staffing perspective, is like all of these position reductions. These are a spring family, and so we are not. We are ensuring that this staff will have positions for 24-25. And so, from the HR perspective, for example, when you give a nod, that allows me to go ahead and start pulling positions, looking at hire dates, look at surplus, to be able to start identifying staff, so then I can start matching them up to vacancies. And when you're talking about the hundreds of positions and people, that does take time to get it right so that people know as soon as possible. Okay, here's where we found your home, or here's where I found another home. And so that is just one additional piece to consider as the staffing piece. So, for example, when we get the elementary interventionists, when I received that nod in January, I'm working on spreadsheets for every campus with their people. So I started pulling interventionists, sorting by hiring dates to help make these decisions easier for the principal to identify staff. So it's just, there's just staffing implications too, to get people into their new homes.
Again, I understand that. I just don't want to rush the body if they're not ready.
Right. Another point to Dr. King's, when we say that typically we bring numbers in April, we bring numbers in April. However, the budget season kicks off for us in January. And so typically by now, we would have already begun having our budget staffing meetings with our principals. And in those budget staffing meetings, when we're not in the circumstance that we're in right now, the principals know what their staffing is because they've had those meetings and we're just following the staffing guidelines. We can't start those meetings with the principals until we know what their staffing is going to be. So though the numbers don't come until April, all of that work beforehand is happening in January, February, and March. And so to be honest with you, right now, we're actually behind schedule because that behind the scenes work can't happen until we get that info. We haven't even scheduled our budget staffing meetings yet because we don't have that final clarity on exactly what we're doing. And the principals have asked us to please know what our staffing allocations will be before we have our budget staffing meetings, because they don't want to move ahead with the plan and then that plan changes. That's what happened last year, and it causes confusion. So we're ahead in some ways, but we're also behind in other ways. They want to be out hiring for any open positions before we get to spring break. And we can't do that if we don't have this information laid out. So we are behind the 8 ball right now. Even though it appears that we have a lot of time, we really do not.
Historically, how have we managed it? Because we didn't make decisions this early before.
Because the staffing guidelines were what they were, and we weren't bringing a proposed change to the staffing guidelines. So in January and February, we were allocating our staffing based on the approved staffing guidelines. And so right now, the proposed reductions are changes to those staffing guidelines. And so we need to know what those changes are before we can give them their allocations. And that was a request that came straight from the principals. They said, please know what our staffing allocations are before we have budget staffing meetings.
So how have all of you had an opportunity to look through this data?
We just need a nod for the high schools right now, right?
Yeah. So I think the question on the floor, the question you're asking us about are the information, the items that we had on hold from the January meeting. Okay, all right.
Looking at what we have here, from the discussion that we've had, personally myself, just me, I am okay with removing the hold on the interventionist specialist
For the high school ones, right?
for the high schools. There's 2 per high school.
And
So that's 2
according to the
interventionists.
staffing guidelines, that would leave us with how many interventionists on the campus?
Okay, so we're talking high school?
Right, because
Right.
she was talking about elementary.
So
I
for
thought-
high
I
school,
asked her if it was high school.
We done with elementary.
Yeah, I asked, yeah, we're talking about high school now.
and so the high schools, we have provided them with a great deal of autonomy over the last couple of years. If you recall, starting in 23-24, we created a pot of funds for their at-risk positions, and we allowed the principals to say that how they wanted to use those funds. And then we've allowed some flexibility with some of the other positions. So the long and short of that is it's going to vary from campus to campus because we've given them autonomy, which is why they've also had the autonomy to say which positions they wanted to give up.
So that variance makes me nervous because we have, at our comprehensive high schools, we have one long-term veteran building principal at Decaney. And the other 2 are relatively new. We just finished talking about the advantage that Ms. Warford has as a 9-year veteran principal. And so if we're giving autonomy to, baby principals effectively, that makes me a little nervous.
I just want to correct you there. Ms. Hunter at Westfield.
I understand.
is not.
Just that she's been a building principal though for 2 years.
I don't know how many in spring, but she's been in HISD, an area superintendent in HISD.
That kills that argument
That
for
came
her.
here.
That-
So, yeah, she's
that means
well,
we-
she's well endowed with
Okay.
knowing
So that
budgets.
shoots that one down. We
She
still,
can work budgets.
And
So
definitely,
Ms. Westbrooks, it looks like the body is prepared to respond to your question.
Oh, okay, and so, Mr. Adams, I can't tell what you all can see. Can you only see it up there? Well, okay, so this is the high school staffing guidelines. And so this is the support that the high schools currently have. And so last year, during the budget reduction, we gave them again the ability to say which of these positions, because as part of the work with the equity committee, we were moving towards allowing campuses to make decisions based on their unique needs. And so that's where that autonomy comes from. So these are some positions, and it still can vary because during this budget reduction process last year, different campuses gave up different positions based on their individual needs. And so, but these are the positions that are available to the campuses. It just may have varied now simply because we've allowed them to keep or give up based on their campus needs. Now, they also have a pot of funds that's about $300 per at-risk student. And with those pots of funds, they get additional at-risk teachers, and sometimes they may get an interventionist out of those funds. So we were extremely prescribed, and everyone had exactly what was on this list, but we've slowly moved away from that to allow them the opportunity to make those decisions based on their data. Now, they do have the guidance of their assistant superintendents. They have the guidance from our academics team to help them make those decisions with their data, but it's not as prescribed as it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
I'll say, at our January meeting, the request was for principals to come with a plan, and so they've come up with a plan, so I'll have a nod as well.
I'm a little concerned about the library aid because I understand that the libraries at the high schools will actually be shut down for certain parts of the day. Is that correct? That there will not be anybody, they have to actually close the library to
Can
students?
I ask Dr. Cuellar to speak to that? The
Okay.
libraries will not be shut down.
No, ma'am, libraries will not be shut down. Libraries are an integral part of our day-to-days, especially in supporting our instruction. And so we really depend on them, especially for, not only for our literacy initiatives and our work, but also in supporting our students in multiple ways. So libraries are an integral part of our day-to-day teaching and learning environment.
So there'll always be a librarian or a librarian aide to check out books.
You have my promise.
I think.
Is there any concern with the hall monitors? How many hall monitors are we left in high school? Because that
They
seems,
would go back to the original allocation, which was 5 hall monitors. So we started with 5, we moved up to 10, and now we would go back to the 5 per comprehensive high school.
okay.
With the autonomy and an equity lens, that if you needed more, you could crib together the funding to have more, or?
If they would like to use their at-risk, we would have to make a case for it of how that would fall into the at-risk category. But we entertain anything the principals bring forward.
Okay.
We entertain it and make sure that we can make it happen with the funding sources. So for clarity, with the campus list, I just want to make sure that we walk away again on the same page. So with the campus list, we're going back to item H, which is the high school interventionist, and we're saying that we can remove the hold. Yes. Item I, which is the CTE teachers, will continue to hold until we get the ABLE data next month. And then with the elementary interventionist position, we're moving forward. Yes. Okay. Thank you for your patience, Trustee Correa. Now, if we want to move to the central office reduction list, we also have that available on the screen, so we can scroll to each one of the items, but of course you have the list in your packets.
Yeah, we just, we bounced around so much, I wasn't quite sure where we were at times, so I apologize. There was a note that I saw for child nutrition. It was item 70, No. 80, sorry, line 80. And I think I noted this somewhere else too. Leveraging the child nutrition dollars, I guess as a supplant to the general funds. But the note says child nutrition, the federal funds are not approved by the Texas Department of Agriculture to pay for this expense.
Right, so we were able to clarify that with our child nutrition team, and so we're looking at risk. And so the risk would be that it's possible that maybe in the future, the federal funds through child nutrition wouldn't be able to pay for that. However, our child nutrition department has confirmed that it is an allowable expenditure.
And did I see somewhere where it said one of the expenses,
All right, Trustee Correa, what item are you on?
that was item 80?
80, okay.
But I think there was another notation about the trash services?
Yes, there
Waste
was.
removal?
Yeah,
It
that
said
was
only-
on item my colleague to my right is telling me, I just had it and I'm not scrolling very well, 43. Item 43 is also child nutrition supported. Just for the benefit of everyone, child nutrition is a federally funded program. We do have the ability to charge direct costs that are associated with child nutrition from general funds to child nutrition funds if they're approved by the Texas Department of Agriculture. And we did get approval on all these items. We were filling out the risk column on this document, and we determined that the risk would be any future unapproved items. So if in the future Texas TDA decided that they disapprove these items, that would be the risk. But child nutrition operates with a very healthy fund balance. We close out each year with a surplus. We haven't had anything less than a surplus since the pandemic, and obviously you can imagine the pandemic didn't do us any favors for child nutrition, but therefore we're able to use some of these funds to offset, as it states, kind of in the desired outcome, we're leveraging these child nutrition dollars so that our student dollars can go further in general funds.
And you touched on a point, child nutrition always has a healthy balance
Correct.
left over. And so I noticed that the cost on that line was only a third of the
Right,
total.
and we scrubbed and scrubbed, and we're looking for ways that we can use those funds. If we find others, we'll certainly do that as well.
Thank you.
There are other things that aren't on here that we're already charging to child nutrition, so we've already, in years past, have been scrubbing, that to make sure that we were able to cover as much as we could. We were just able to find some additional dollars that we could cover.
Are there any other questions?
I had one for question number 2. I was wondering, for the FACE director moving to coordinator, how much that will impact the work of FACE, or what will that look like?
That's Miss Luna in the base. She was actually, when she took that position, it was lowered to a coordinator position. So she wasn't reduced to a coordinator position, but she was promoted to that position. And so she's doing a phenomenal job in FACE, leading that work right now.
So she's essentially already been
Correct.
operating now. Okay.
Correct.
I didn't have any questions for this one. I don't know. Anyone else? Okay. Looks like you met the needs for the ask from January.
I did have one before we move for number 5, and I guess maybe I could have done some math. The Emerge, how will that impact our beloved Emerge program?
A zero impact. So,
Okay.
One thing that we've been doing through this budget season is meeting with our partners, and sharing where we are as a district, where we are with the state with not funding adequately. And Emerge met the challenge and helped us secure some additional funding on their side. So that is a complete saving with no change at all to the services.
Okay.
Continue to be that great program and great partner with us.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I did have one more question. 62, the police replacement vehicle engines. So, my question is, historically, were we replacing engines in the vehicles, or I wasn't quite
They carried a
understanding.
line because we had so many old vehicles in the police department before we had bond dollars. We carried dollars to be able to refurb engines when we needed to, but now because we have bond dollars, we don't need to carry that line item anymore.
Got it.
And you'll see later on in our procurement that we are purchasing vehicles.
I just wanted to comment on how much I appreciate the way this is done. This is a really useful way to look at the information, so thank you.
And I'd like to thank Trustee Natasha McDaniel, who brought forward the format. So I want to thank you for that. Okay, guys, I'm gonna assume we can move on. Okay, all right. Ms. Westbrooks?
Just going to turn it back over to you, President Durant, for the board member reduction recommendations.
Thank you. There is a manila folder that I handed out. As part of the budget process, I took the opportunity to poll the board to bring forward any recommendations they had for reductions to help us balance the budget this year. And I want to thank those board members that did send forward recommendations, and I'm actually going to have you guys speak to those at this time. I did put it all together in one document, and I'll let Trustee Hodges go first. I got yours first.
All right. Okay, so, good evening, everyone. So President Durant did ask us as board members to give some recommendations. And so is this the first time this document is being presented, or did they see it prior to today?
I provided it to the administration on Monday, so they would have an opportunity to be prepared to respond. I did just email it to you guys today.
Okay. So I'm not sure, it's, my first recommendation is looking at salary reductions as it relates to the central office staff, recommending possibly a 2% reduction in staff salaries. In review of the salaries that were presented to us, looking at the data that we received as it relates to some of the districts that are close or comparable to ours, our salaries were a little heavy in the central office staff. So that was my first recommendation. And then after looking at the data that was provided as it relates to the allowances, I recommend discontinuing both car and cell phone allowances to further optimize expenses. And that would be more so for staff members that are not, I understand that there are those, well, let me say this, looking at the car allowance and also the cell phone allowances, some of what we were paying in cell phone allowances were kind of absorbent, but from my understanding, I was told that this was part of their compensation, so I'm a little unclear on how you can do that, and y'all may want to speak to that from an HR perspective, but with the data and the information that I received, these are my recommendations. Also, someone said, corporate cell phone account, instead of paying the cell phone, giving a cell phone stipend, then maybe we can consider exploring the option of acquiring a corporate account and providing cell phones specifically for essential staff members, and that's including Dr. Hinojosa. Shared transportation in lieu of car allowances, I propose allocating 2 SUVs for central office staff. This will facilitate carpooling to meetings as necessary throughout the day. Mileage reimbursement, I just wanted to note that the IRS permits mileage reimbursement for work-related travel, and this, offering this as an alternative solution for transportation expenses for central office and also other staff members as well. So those are my suggestions.
And so I think some of the data that she was referring to, there's a little grid in here from the TAPER report that kind of summarized the percentage of our staff compared to some of the like districts. So if you guys, I just wanted to point out what she was referencing. All right, Ms. Westbrooks?
Yes. We were able to review the data that you shared with us, and Jason, do you mind helping with passing the orange folders? I think that's it. And I shared.
While she's passing this out, and I believe this was page 31 of the TAPER report, if I'm correct. Okay. And so just according to the 22-23 TAPER report, our percentage of staff that provided actual instruction is 5% lower than the state average. But our turnover rate for teachers is 10% higher than the state average, despite the fact that we pay 10% more than the state average. Meanwhile, we're paying our average central office personnel is 24% higher than the state average in salaries.
Mr. Shepherd, I emailed you a copy of, so in your folders that we just passed out, there's a document that looks like this, and it's the behind the numbers information for the data that you're referencing on the TAPER report. And so Mr. Shepherd's going to put it up on the screen so everyone can see what I'm referring to. But it looks like this. And so the data that's on the TAPER report, when we first saw this information, when we're comparing data between the districts, it's really important to make sure that we're doing an apples to apples comparison. And one of the things that we've noted before is that with PEAMS reporting, there are some areas where there is discretion, and discretion in how items are coded. And some of that was evident when TASBO came and presented at the January 11th board meeting, where when we saw the librarian numbers per student, and Aldine's was 2,700 and Springs was 300, and we said that's coding. That's how they've chosen to code some of their staff. And some of that is relevant here as well. And so we're gonna put it up so we can make sure everybody sees the same thing. Okay, so do you all have a copy of this information at your seats? Okay, so the number that is quoted here for the average central office salary in Spring ISD on the TAPER report is $139,895. And so the concern comes in, Jason, can you make it bigger? The concern comes in when you're comparing Spring ISD to Aldine, A-Leaf, and particularly Humble. And so if you notice, if you look at Kleins and you look at Springs, they look a lot more comparable. And so what you have here on the right-hand side are what we refer to as roll IDs. So all of the data that you see in the TAPER report, it's all submitted to the state by all school districts. So TA tells us which codes are included in the central office codes. And so if you look, that's on the right-hand side. And if you look on the left-hand side, you see the school districts, you see their average salary, and then you see the TAPER count. And what that count is that tells you how many positions are being coded to those roll IDs that make up that average. And so you look at Aldine's, and they have 133.7 positions in there. A-Leaf has 77.7 positions. Spring has 32 positions that are in there. Humble 82 and Klein 28.5. The difference is who they have chosen to code to these categories. And so it's very clear. We only have one superintendent. Every district only has one superintendent. Every district only has one business manager, tax assessor, etc. And we would get a code that would kick out if you tried to put two superintendents in. Does that make sense? However, when you go to program directors, 0, 1, 2, that's where some of that discretion comes in. So if you look at Aldine's number at 133 versus Springs at 32 and Klein's at 28, there's discretion there. Spring is only reporting those roll IDs that are there. We only have, if it's a director of multilingual, they're in there. If it's a director of gifted and talented, they're in there, because those are our program directors. But as you can clearly see, other districts interpret that differently. So if we're only including our superintendent, assistant superintendents, our program directors, our number by and large is going to be higher than a district who's taken the discretion to include instructional specialists and other positions that are bringing that average down. So my point here is that this is not an apples to apples comparison. Spring ISD is not paying 25% higher than the state average when you look at central administration. You are not comparing apples to apples, and the point is to show you the number of positions that are being included in each one of these districts that skews that number. And so that's just context to go along with the data and the research that was provided to make these recommendations.
Okay.
that sounds like a strategic or policy choice that they're making. What would you speculate is the reason they would do that?
The conversation that we're having here this evening. It looks as though they're spending a lot less. And I do not want to speak for another district because that's not my place. I represent Spring ISD, but it is discretion. And it does look really non-comparable to the state.
So,
Trustee Westbrook, in looking at the information and the data that was presented, and knowing that we have budget cuts, in your expert opinion, where do you recommend we cut budget, have budget cuts in the central office?
We actually brought this list that has 80 or 90 items
I'm
actually on
talking
it.
about as it relates to how would we determine as far as salary cuts and things like that? What do you?
Well, we have been for the past 4 years working directly with TASB, who has the salary data for the school districts, and they're doing the comparative analysis to determine whether or not Spring ISD salaries are within the market range. And so that's looking at all of the 15 districts surrounding Spring. And so that's what we're using to determine whether or not we're fairly and adequately compensating our staff. Because that's real data. This data, it's real data, but you can see the discretion that's in here, that's in this data. The counts dilute the average. And so if I were making decisions, I would make decisions based on that data, because that data is truly apples to apples comparison.
So with that being said, as it relates to taper, I mean, we use that data to make a lot of decisions. So how do we, I guess my question is, and how do we determine or know when we're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges? Because one, I feel like now my time is wasted because I spent hours delving off looking and doing my job as an elected official, what I was asked to do in representing my community and looking at this. And now I'm getting a report from you, and I appreciate the context, but I have a problem with that because I spent a lot of time and put a lot of thought and research into determining, I didn't just type up, those 3 suggestions without reading the data. So I have a problem with that. And I know at the end of the day, we have a huge deficit and we need to figure out where we're going to make cuts. So we need to figure it out.
Trustee Hodges, if I may, one of the things that I've come to realize just sitting here right now,
me too.
a lot of the data from the state is full of garbage. It's full of noise. Extra stuff that doesn't mean anything, any outliers that are getting lumped in.
Right. And that's my point. Where do we draw the line? Because we're making, sometimes we make decisions using it in certain areas.
Yeah.
Some areas we don't use it, and I need to figure out.
I think we have to
how do we
look
do
at
that?
the data that we're getting from the state, just with, we have to weigh it accordingly. I mean,
And
it is alarming
So,
that.
yeah, it is. And first of all, I just shared this information with administration on Monday, and I want to thank Ms. Westbrooks for pulling this together because it definitely is eye-opening. So great job. But to Trustee Hodges' point, it's frustrating because we're sitting here, elected by the community, responsible for closing a $25 million deficit. How do we get there, I think, is what Ms. Hodges' question is. Because even with what's come out of the committee, we're only at 10, 11 million. Where do we get the rest from? And not only, technically, it's not just the 25 million. To me, it's 36 because we've got the 11 million from the healthcare plan that's going to hit the fund balance too. So it's 25 plus that 11. So help us.
Well, we're controlling what we can control. And so Dr. King and I are working behind the scenes, as we mentioned, with the guidance that you all provided us with the interlocal agreement to work on getting the cost under control with the medical plan. We met with our elected officials.
Yes, we did.
To ask them for their assistance as well. So we're absolutely controlling what we can control. We have other mechanisms that we've also discussed as well that we may look into at a later date as well. So, and we are chipping away at this. And Trustee Hodges, we appreciate the work. I know you did your due diligence behind the scenes, and we just dug a little bit deeper and gave some additional information to go along with the data that you provided.
I appreciate that conduct.
Yes.
And also, I'd like to, it's a lot of work, right? And also, look at the data that we provided, or that Dr. King provided last month, because that one also has our salaries for every principal, director, assistant superintendent. And then there was another attachment that was part of the TASB study. You might want to talk about that, Dr. King, because it's hard to understand market value. So talk about that, and then I'll come back to expand on some of the work that we're doing in central office.
Yes, thank, oh, go ahead.
This is something, so just because I don't want to beat a dead horse with this, so my clarifying question is, our central office staff salaries are comparable to the market rate. They are.
And so if you look in your packet, we handed it out again tonight, the TASB salary benchmarks. And so now we're currently undergoing the salary study for this year. So when that data is available for this year, we will bring it to you, but this is from last year. And so these are the last year's salaries compared to the market. And so it's a little bit more apples to apples than the taper, because it's chief HR officer in Spring to chief HR officer in the other districts in the average. And so the salary there is listed along with then what it is in the other districts, and it gives us a market comparison. And so what if a salary is between 90% to 100% of market, that means it's comparable to the market. If it's over 100%, that salary exceeds the market. If it's below, if it's 89% or below, it's below the market. And so we're looking to keep that sweet spot of 90 to 100%. And so that documentation, you can see where our individual salaries, our actual salaries, fall into the market. There's also, I can explain it, I don't want to get you too confused, but then it talks about midpoint comparisons in that and market there.
Is this it?
That is it, yes, yes.
So I don't know if y'all have the blue folder from January.
Sorry, Mike.
But they're in your orange, we passed it out again tonight, it's in your orange folder
That's
as
part
well.
of what I use for my recommendations.
What's the title of it, just to clarify? Is it Spring ISD Market Comparisons?
I can pass mine down.
It's in the blue folder from last month.
But it's also in the orange folder that
Yes.
just got handed out. Yes, we gave it again tonight, yes, ma'am.
Like a lavender color
Document C
border at
is
the top.
Oh,
I have mine. 'cause
It's exactly
that's
the
mine's on
same.
my
If you have your
computer.
blue folder or the orange folder from tonight, it's the same info.
Or if you use your computer, it's there.
Saving on paper? Can I ask, I know your light's on. Are you-
Oh, I'm good.
So I have experience with this because I used to do this. So I understand this data. My only question is the district's reporting. Because the positions have a different number of districts reporting for each position. And so your midpoint, the market, all of that is only gonna be as good as your comparable, districts, I guess. So this kind of goes back to the Region 4 question again. This is TASB, and this is gonna be a multitude of different schools. So do we know that the districts reporting into these positions are comparable to our district? Because that will definitely affect the final numbers.
On
Now,
the list, the closest one is A-League, because Alden's almost twice our size.
And as we do this year's report, I have asked TASB for a different set of
Yeah.
comparison districts. Because yes, and in fact, in the staffing review too, we're looking at a different set of comparison districts to try to get a more comparable look. And so, yes, we when we present this year's data, it will have a different look And we can get you a list of the preliminary districts, because the report hasn't even been drafted yet. So we can tell them, if we can let you see the list, and you can say, that we would like this district is included. Now, the caveat with the TASB survey is, districts had to respond to it. So for example, I was doing some work with them on some other data, trying to get it, and I wanted some data from our next door neighbor Klein, but Klein did not respond to this year's salary survey. So it's if the district responds to it. And the other caveat there is, I charge our team, we report accurately, right? But everyone has to report accurate information. So,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and just for the boards, just my own personal research that I did on some of these positions, looking at kind of comparable, what's publicly available. A lot of this data is very secretive and you have to pay for it.
You want to share what you did?
Yeah, so what I did see is that the positions that I did look at, a handful, we are kind of right in the middle of the pay.
So how's the how do we determine the midpoint? I think you mentioned something about the midpoint.
yes, the midpoint is the midpoint of our pay grade from our compensation plan that's board approved. That's the midpoint representing 15 years of direct experience in a position. And so that helps us look to see if our pay scales need to be adjusted, as when we're looking at that market data.
Okay, thank you.
And so, Ms. Hodges, your question is, how do we get there, right? Like, what are we gonna do? We've got 25 million, we've got about 10 million on the, we did 9.2 million last year. We have 10 million right now, so it would leave us another 15, right? That we will, so this is this proposal. We've got two other pieces coming forward that we hope to be able to, again, squeeze out more. One is the ABLE study that's really gonna be looking at our scheduling, our master scheduling. And I think there was one piece that Ms. Correa and her recommendations, I can tell y'all did a lot of research. And there is a way to get, more bang for our buck in our master schedules. And so when we get to it, I know she'll talk about it, and actually we did our own research and we're moving in that direction, and we know we're gonna be saving some money there. The other piece is going to be the TASB study that Dr. King has commissioned that we will be getting, and you'll see some savings there and some good data for us centrally. How do we use our central office staff? And I think it was one of the recommendations, specialists or coordinators that are sitting in central office. How are they being used? Should they be at the campuses? And so those are some of the works that we are doing now with our directors to make sure that we are taking care of the campuses first and not, taking care of the campuses first. And so I can assure you that all of our directors, our chiefs have that charge. Last year, we were able to eliminate $1.7 million. I was able to, back then, we had a cabinet and cut 2 chief positions, cut assistant superintendent positions, director positions. So last year, we were able to cut 10 central office positions and tighten up. And we are looking centrally again, how can we continue to do that? Because we know that the focus has to be at the school and has to be at the students. And so we will continue to chip away at this. We knew this was coming, and so our work had started already. Now it's here. Can it be done in 1 year? Can we cut $25 million in 1 year? No, there's no way. But we can do our due diligence, and, talking to Ms. Westbrooks, can we get to, we were at 12 million earlier, we took some back. Can we get to anywhere, closer to 12 million, so we're halfway through? The advocacy work that you all are doing is going to help, and that will carry us 1 more year for the next legislative session. If we can carry ourselves 1 more year to that legislative session, and then work with our elected officials to get the relief from the state that we need to. We also have had some other discussions of other opportunities that the district may consider with a VATRE. That's another option that's out there. So we want to get to at least 12 million this year without negatively impacting our students. Make the commitment that we'll look towards that next 13 million. Work with our elected officials. And this March 5th primary is going to be really important for us. Get to the next legislative session and work through that. So I feel confident that, I think Dr. King talked about it, this is our Spring ISD family, and, staffing is the largest percentage of our budget. We're at 86%, 87%, right along other districts. They're at the same percentage of staffing. So we want to make sure that we take care of our staff, and the commitment has been made. We've made the commitment that if you want to be in Spring, there is a place for you in Spring. This is not about people not having a job in Spring. I want to be very clear that everyone will have a place in Spring. Our roles may look a little bit different, and we may have to pick up more duties and responsibilities as we get through this process. But I can assure you, we'll make it through.
Thank you so much. I'd like to, Madam President, I didn't mean to monopolize all the time. I know that my colleagues have,
Yes.
so I'm done.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make a comment and a couple quick comments, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jensen to go over her recommendations. But Spring is a family, and it takes a village. And I think as a board, and I can speak on behalf of everyone, is that we appreciate and recognize the central office impacts and works for students as well. So we recognize that and we appreciate that. And we don't want it to come across like we're not appreciating anyone. It's just 25 million is a lot, and we got to find it somewhere. And I want to also thank my colleagues for accepting my challenge and actually digging into the data, learning what it means. I mean, I learned some stuff tonight because I looked at that data originally from the taper, and what Ms. Westbrooks brings us tonight puts a whole different perspective on it. And so we're all learning as we go along, and I know you all dedicated a lot of time to it, and I appreciate it. So Dr. Jensen?
All right, I am the one who requested to have information about how much it costs for trustees to travel to conferences and so on. And from the data I'm looking at, it looks like we could save nearly $48,000 if we no longer just put a year moratorium on our out-of-state travel. Now, I am strongly supporting our within-state travel. Like I know we have had trustees with Leadership TASB that we have supported, absolutely worth every dollar. Also, I don't want to give up our national membership to NASB, but there are a lot of things that you can get online from the national conference, and I think that for a year we could get along with that instead of moving our bodies over to some place where they have a fairly expensive hotel and flights are expensive and that sort of thing. So I'm proposing that we have a year moratorium on that. Now, we have our travel, but then the district has to send an employee along with us. So that we would also save. So that's where I get to the about $48,000 we would save. The next suggestion I have is asking community partners to support travel costs for students who are traveling to state, national, and international competitions. I do not want to get in trouble with UIL, but there are some just amazing things that kids are doing at the national and even international level. And if we have the students going and we're paying for them appropriately, I know, it would be wonderful to have some local business say, we are a proud supporter of so-and-so. The next thing is, could we reduce the amount of paper? Here I am sitting with all this paper, and I will take a lead from trustee Hodges that, and at home, I have all these notebooks I have saved sometimes, and I thought, why did I save this? So I just think that perhaps we could reduce, I volunteer to get my notebook digitally, okay? And if any other trustees would, I think we'd save people a lot of trouble. The other thing is, part of the paper reduction, I know we're trying to provide Chromebooks to all our students, and I noticed tonight in our agenda that we are having to buy replacements for Chromebooks because, if they're getting used by students, they wear out and get broken and that sort of thing. But hopefully it's the age where we can actually deliver more activities and tests and that sort of thing by Chromebook. We may already be maxing that out. This is just ideas. The next thing is we've been had a business that we had come in and do a assessment of all our buildings and tell us how to save energy. And I know one of the worst buildings in the district was Spring High School. So I know that when we build a new Spring High School, we're going to be saving energy costs there big time. But in the meantime, are there some simple, inexpensive things we can do? I know that many of the schools, if you're in this building, if you're out of the room for a while, the lights turn off. They're automatic things. But perhaps in some of the schools they don't have that. If we could just look at that. Also, on bus runs, sometimes you see a bus with only 5 students in it, and it may be at the end of the bus run, and that's why I'm seeing that. But I'm sure that the transportation department is always looking at putting bus runs together for more efficiency of delivery and pickup of students. And especially at the secondary level, high school, sometimes high school students don't want to ride the bus. And I think that's when it really bothers me to see a bus not completely full. But these are just a few ideas.
Thank you, Dr. Jensen, and I don't know, Ms. Westbrooks or Ms. Hinojosa, if you had any response to. No, okay.
I do believe we
say we
wanted
do.
to speak to the energy efficiency. Yes.
Yeah, I did want to respond for a few of them touched on some of the things that we are doing. We did have an organization that was helping us with some of the energy. We are saving money from that contract, and we do have some positions that we do have that are coming to help us to continue to do some of those energy efficiency responses that you talked about. So we will continue those programs in the school district. So I'm really looking forward to that. So that's one thing. The other thing on the fuel that was really interesting that you mentioned that. And you may have noticed in our central office cuts that one of the reductions was fuel costs. You probably remember in the last year that we had been really nervous about our fuel cost going very high. One of the things that we've been able to do, because we've had some new personnel in transportation that have done a really good job at looking at our routes, is that we have done we think a better job of looking at our routes and kind of the turns and the different things, and being a little more efficient in that. And so we've saved some money on fuels. We're also using some of our bond monies to purchase smaller buses. You may have seen them around if you've driven around. They're kind of in vogue a little bit in some school districts. They're smaller 15-passenger. I believe they're 15-passenger. Is that right? I'm sorry? 13-passenger buses. They're white buses. They don't require a CDL. And they're going to be a lot more efficient for the smaller runs that you just talked about. So we're not running a 72-passenger bus on a smaller run. And again, we can use those for runs that don't require a CDL. So there's lots of opportunities. You also would have maybe seen some of that on our central office cuts. So a lot of the things you touched on, great minds think alike because we have those on our central office cuts.
Okay, I did want to follow up with regards to our travel. I think there are opportunities there. Recently, we had the governance and advocacy conference coming up with TASB in Galveston, and maybe that's something the governance committee could attend and not the whole board. So is there any objection to us taking a look at how we can reduce our spending costs?
Just caution you about canceling for something that people are driving cars to. And that is that we have to pay the registration anyway, if you're too late. And probably one of the worst uses of trustee money is someone who cancels at the last minute. Because sometimes you can't get the registration back, and those registrations can be hundreds of dollars sometimes.
So I use that conference that's coming up in 2 weeks as an example of how we can make changes moving forward. So I just want to make sure that there was no one objecting to cutting back at and looking at our travel expenditures. Okay. So thank you, Dr. Jensen. We'll definitely take a look at that. So we're going to do our part also. Trustee Adams, I think you're next on this list, but I think we might have already touched on yours.
We did. So since I've been on, when I was first elected to this board, I went to a baby board member training, and there was a training about finance, which was the thing that I was weakest at when I first got to the board. I didn't know anything about finance. And so I attended a session where they talked about the percentage of your district's budget that should be allotted to payroll. And at that time, they were telling me that you should never be above 85%. That if you're above 85%, somebody's wheeling cash out the back door. And we were always over 85%, right? And then the TASBO lady came and said, your percentage of payroll should be between 70 and 80%. What I have realized sitting here is we're just sort of on the long side of the Bell distribution curve in terms of our payroll. And I wonder if there's an opportunity to move us down, and it looks like that's already started, to move us down from nearly 87% closer to the 80% that is where most of the people are under the Bell distribution curve in the state of Texas. I feel like that addresses the Georgetown Economics Lab will tell you that the biggest bang for your buck is dealing with your payroll issues. That over the last 30 years, the number of students in public schools has decreased and the number of employees serving a smaller number of students has increased. And so my only suggestion for all of this is to look at ways where we can streamline and be more efficient, where it'll make the most difference, which is in payroll.
We did have an opportunity to reach out to Dr. Brownson, who is the TASBO representative that came and presented, and I did ask her about her 70 to 80% comment that she made. And so we did find the actual data at the state level, and it's in your orange folder as well. It has a payroll expenditure headline on it. And so this is at the state level. So the percentage for payroll, I'll give you a moment. I know there's a lot of docs in there. It looks like this. The header is payroll expenditures. Yes. Did you find it? So that one, you can see at the state level, the payroll expenditures are 82.27%. So that first column is general funds across the state. And then the second column is all funds. And so, with all funds, sometimes they're very specific with how those funds can be used. But for general fund at the state level, the average is 82.27%. And so what we did is we went and we looked at each district using the same comparison group that was provided to us in the taper report. And so Dr. Hinojosa actually has those notes. It's on your
She
your
looks for
list.
it. I just want to thank you again because you did a lot of work from what I gave you on Monday. And once again, the taper data.
As Dr. Hinojosa looks for that information, President Durant, just want to echo, or just reiterate something that she alluded to earlier. We are working with TASB again to do a staffing analysis of our central office positions, because yes, we did our central office budget reductions, but this is coming from analysis from an outsider to say, where do we have chances to gain efficiencies? And so I've been working with them, and so that recommendation will be coming on that presentation will be coming on March 7th with recommendations, from outside lens. And it's a role where the TASBO look was a function-based comparison. This is going to be role-based, and so now titles, vary from district to district, but we're looking at, okay, what does this specific role do? Okay, then how many of these people do you have that do this role? Now, not all districts have all roles, or we might have roles that other districts don't have, and vice versa. But this will give us specifically looking at every central office function, but by role, so that we can say, okay, well, how do we compare in our staffing, and are there efficiencies that can be gained from there as well?
When was the last time we did that study? I've seen it before, but it's been, the TASB study when we're looking at market values by roles.
Last year. We've done it annually since 2020.
Now, that's the staffing.
No, not that.
That's the salary.
Oh, the staffing
The
with
staffing
TASB?
with TASB.
2008.
2008.
Yes.
Okay, I knew it had been a minute. Okay.
So just a clarifying question. The information that we received from the lady who presented from TASBO
Last month.
How do we, so did that data really pertain to us as a district, or?
That's like I've been.
It brings into question
There's
the
a lot
whole
of,
thing.
so there's a lot of noise in the data, right? You're looking, there's more than it's like 1,100 school districts in Texas. Most of them are tiny, 400 kids, right? So you just like when you lump all of that in there, there's a lot of extra data that isn't relevant to us.
So I only want data that's relevant to us.
No, TASB did have.
Is that doable?
When she was saying 70 to 80%, I think she was talking about, she was lumping in all these little bitty districts.
So we did go district by district to look, and so I found my A-Leaf is at 89%, 89.4% of their budget is, and this is on the public PEMS website, so it's on their public website. So A-Leaf is 89.64, Klein is 90.77, Aldine is 82.6, Cy-Fair is 89.13, and Humble is 86.8. So you can see we're comparable.
And I can attest to that because I did my own deal about 2 years ago. I did the exact same thing. I just went on, got the information publicly, and that our surrounding districts were higher than us, and it surprised me.
Trustee Adams, are you okay and done with? Okay. Next is Trustee Correa.
So some of mine have already been kind of answered. Some of mine were recommendations, some of them were just kind of musings and questions to think about. My first was, we may need to consider salary reductions and cutting perks that come with the cost. I think we kind of already touched on that a few times. The question, do we need to consider pausing any bond activities? I know that the funds are allocated to that project, but I was thinking more of a long-term cost. Like, once we get the facility or whatever it is, you know, kind of thinking in those terms, what are the long-term implications to our finances with whatever we're doing with the bond funds? And so that's where my question was coming from. If we consider closing schools and consolidating, I had said we might want to revisit the 2-mile change to busing, but it seems like we've dropped that, so. We might want to consider charging tuition for pre-K. That's not unheard of. There are other districts that are charging, and there is what's a state limit that we could, I think there's a state limit that we can charge. So that's more from the income perspective. Our utility costs are high, and so I know you had touched on, Mr. Miranda, about utilities. You know, are we doing everything to become energy efficient where applicable? Can we reduce the costs, or, you know, can we consider directing bond funds, which I think we are in some areas. And my example was automatic switches to shut off lights when no one's around, you know, that sort of thing. Can we find cost savings on aligning the entire district on scheduling 7 periods versus the block scheduling? And I think that's one thing that Dr. Hinojosa was gonna discuss.
ABL.
And ABL. I think I remember seeing a purchase order for upgraded police vehicles. Am I crazy? I remember seeing it. It was like $1 million, and I remember looking at the number, and I was like, oh my goodness. My initial thought was, should we reconsider? But it sounds like the long-term cost with not having to refurbish, and so there was that. I had a question for positions being eliminated. How is that money being reinvested? That's just kind of a general question. The salary survey, that was one of my questions, and then academic ROI. We talk a lot about academic ROI, and it seems like we've discussed it, but I unless I just miss it, I haven't ever seen it on anything. So my question was, are we receiving the grid with the academic ROI? But I'm happy that we got the grid, because that's a good start, so. That was it.
I had one question in reference to her fourth item about considering charging tuition for pre-K. And this may be something, you may know it offhand, but would, what is it called where you get daycare assistance? NCI. Is that, thank you. Okay, NCI, would that be an option, given the demographics of the community that we serve with pre-K?
For the individual parents. Now, what we have found.
I'm saying us
Yes.
accepting, could we accept
saying-
NCI? Or
I'm
I
saying,
don't know the
you're
correct-
saying, what if we were to charge for pre-K and then use NCI to
And they use
pay for the
NCI
Right, can I use
services?
in a
NCI?
public school
Because
system.
I'm thinking, I wouldn't want, you know.
I hear what you're saying.
Uh-huh.
Now, what we are researching is the possibility of offering pre-K 3, because there is full funding for those students. And so instead of them going to a daycare center, they would be able to come to Spring ISD. We would receive full funding versus half funding for pre-K 4. And that would also hopefully keep them with us here in
Right.
Spring. Similar to the program that we began with our pre-K 4s, where even if they're not eligible, we're bringing them in so that hopefully they'll go ahead and stay with us K through 12.
Especially if they have siblings here in higher grades,
Exactly.
it'll make it easier on the parents.
Exactly. So Trustee Hodges, that charge was provided to us by Dr. Hinojosa, and we are beginning that research project on offering that pre-K 3. Yes.
And I did have one last question that I was thinking about after I had already submitted this. When it comes to our investment income, I noticed that I think we're using Hilltop Securities now. And I looked at and I'm not a financial advisor, but I looked at the holdings that we have, and I don't know if that's something we might want to relook at, because where we have some of that money invested seems historically, over this last year, for example, I think we have a lot in securities, and it seems like we might want to look at investing in the bonds, because it seems like there's more return on the bonds in a high interest rate market.
So we actually have 85% of our portfolio is in the local government investment pools, and about 15% are in U.S. securities.
That was the other thing. Looking at some other school districts, there are some additional, there's like Tex Pool and Lone Star Pool.
Those local government investment pools, that's
Right.
Tex Pool and Lone Star, and we utilize all of those.
There were some additional ones that I had seen that we weren't using, and so I didn't know,
Correct.
yeah.
And so we look at them and compare the rates, and a lot of times their rates are very similar. And so, and matter of fact, over at Midwinter, we had a couple that approached me and said, are you using our pools? Would you like to look at our pools? And so we do consistently look at them. A lot of times they're just not enough of a difference between them, but we do try to diversify amongst the pools when we can. So the opportunity is always there, yes. And we do work with Hilltop to continuously look, and with our last bond program, we got more into commercial paper than we had before, which gave us some more opportunities for investment income. So that is something that we do work with our financial advisors to just look holistically at what our options are.
Okay, thank you.
I think Dr. Hinojosa had some response to number 6.
So definitely, and I chuckled when we saw it, because with the research that we've been doing with our middle school and high school teams, and the data that's the preliminary data coming from ABL, it's the straight schedule. And so the assistant superintendents and the middle school and high school principals have met, and we will be going to a district-wide for the comprehensive schools. Of course, the specialty schools need something different, but all comprehensive middle schools and high schools will be going on a straight schedule. We'll definitely see savings, but most importantly for our kiddos, because our students do best when they're seeing their teachers every day. When they come, Ms. Newhouse, they come on Monday, you teach them, you give them homework, and then they forget by Wednesday, right? And so this is seeing their teacher every single day and being constant. So it's good for the students, and we're gonna end up with some savings for the district. I'm just really excited about the opportunity for pre-K and our non-qualified, because our students qualify for pre-K and we get reimbursed for half of the day. Dr. Guillory, give me that number, because for me, bringing all kids to pre-K is important. They need to be prepared, and so what is it? Are staying with us. Those students that did not qualify, and we as Spring ISD believe all children, if they live in our district, should come, and they're of age. And so we're not charging the tuition, and what we're finding is that they're staying with us through first grade. And so we're tracking these kiddos to see how they do by third grade, right? When they start taking the STAR test, because this is a group of kiddos that would have been sitting at home or daycare or, granny or something. So this is going to, number one, it's already giving us a boost in our enrollment. And then number two, now to look at 3-year-olds doing pre-K 3. We'd have to find space, but it's a funding mechanism, but most importantly, it's getting kids into school early as possible, and then retaining them with us. So we're, Ms. Westbrook's got the charge. I'd like for the team to look at that and see what it would be.
And it'd be good to see the impact on their third grade scores as opposed to those that don't do the pre-K. So that'd be interesting. Ms. Graham, you good? Okay, so that just leaves me, but I also think some of mine were covered. Our first one was to review the central office department job roles and responsibilities and identify where there's overlap, duplication of work, and where are there opportunities to better utilize those resources. So, Dr. King, I'm assuming that one will be addressed with the, staffing report we haven't had since '08, right?
Yes, President Durant.
A hiring freeze on all essential staffing. If.
Yes. So we have, and I know Dr. King, you probably want it, because it's coming through him, but we have done that already. You want to?
Yes, President Durant and trustees, we have implemented a central office hiring freeze and a freeze at the campus too, where all positions have to be come through SLT for approval. So we look at the position, the need, determine if it's essential and if it needs to be posted right now. And so all positions, central office hiring freeze went in place, went into effect in December. This campus hiring freeze went into effect February 1st. But now, if a position is essential, especially with teachers and it's kid facing, we are approving it. And so, but for the other positions, just making sure everything is getting a review.
Okay, all right. My last item was around the car allowance and cell phones where appropriate, putting a freeze on that, but we've already talked about that, under Ms. Hodges' recommendations. So that kind of wraps up, the recommendations from, the board. I'm gonna pause a minute to see if any of my other colleagues had anything they'd wanna add.
I did have a question as it relates to the data that was presented around the cell phone and car allowance. Is there any feedback or recommendations from Ms. Westbrook, Chief Westbrooks, or any of the other senior leadership? I'm not really sure in looking at that information that you provided, if that's an area. I guess what I'd like to know is, I saw the numbers, it's calculated the cost. Is there any pushback or any questions related to us being able to do that? Are there any risk involved, I guess?
Well, when we're talking about employees and total compensation, someone mentioned earlier about the allowances being part of the compensation package. And so when we're in salary negotiations and we make a salary offer, that is part of what we use to we may not be able to meet the base salary, but we can tell someone your compensation package falls in with this, with the various allowances. And so,
Can you pause for me a minute? Mr. Binkley, are we okay with the conversation? Open.
You'll have to, I didn't hear what TK was saying. Can you remind me what you were saying?
I was.
The question was around, car allowances and cell phone allowances and the responses around how it's, utilized from a compensation staffing perspective. Which typically when we're talking compensation, that's in closed session. I just wanna make sure we're okay.
So as long as we're not talking about specific individuals and their specific allowances, yeah, in fact, it would generally need to be an open session conversation.
All right, just. Thank you.
Okay, and so. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
Total compensation.
Yes. Is part of the total compensation package. And so the risk will be, when we reduce employees' compensation, employees might choose to look elsewhere to meet their compensation needs. And so that is a risk when you're reducing employee compensation.
Can we explore, I know some of our other districts in my research, especially around the cell phones, they actually they have a plan and they give their employees cell phones. I don't know if that's gonna cost us more or less. I don't, is there any opportunity there? Can we look into that?
Yes.
And we are committed, if you look at the line item, we are committed to cutting 100,000 from the allocated cell phone and car allowance all put together. We did this work back in 2017. We did a major overhaul of the allowances and did reduce them. And so we agree that it's time to look at it again. And so you'll see it as one of the line items, and we're committed to reducing the total cost.
Okay, with that in mind, I'm gonna withdraw my request. I don't wanna give you extra work if they're already looking at it. Okay, right.
Thank you, President Durant.
Okay. That is just your first item, isn't it? So why don't we take a break? But let's make it short so we aren't here too late. Let's take a 5-minute break, give everybody a chance to We're going to reconvene the meeting, and I'll turn it back over to Ms. Westbrook.
Thank you, President Durant. We'll begin with item number 7.2 on page 95, which is the amendment with Harris County regarding the disparity study. And so last month, we brought forward a vendor recommendation to conduct the disparity study for Spring ISD, Alief ISD, and Aldine ISD. And we said at that time that it was contingent upon an amendment that was needed to the timeline. So I wanted to call up our Executive Director of Procurement, Mr. Philip Ellison, to walk us through that amendment. And you have a copy of the amendment, but you also have a copy behind that of the original agreement, just in case you need to refer to it. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Ellison.
Thank you, Ms. Westbrooks. President Durant, Dr. Hinojosa, and members of the board. So the adjustment that we're making is the timeline to accommodate the study as the vendor had identified in their response. It was going to take additional time than what we had considered. And it's one of those things where you make decisions without asking the people that have boots on the ground what's going to happen, and you end up having to adjust. And so this is the adjustment that needed to happen. Essentially, the initial engagement was 24 months, 2 years. The first 12 months were going to be the solicitation, the award, and then the time that the vendor would need to take to do the assessment. And then the second 12 months would be our implementation of any necessary or needed action that needed to be taken. So what we did was we had to adjust the 12 months for the engagement, the solicitation, the award, and the engagement with the vendor to push it out forward. And so what that did is that put us into that 24 months. And that wouldn't have given us any time to do our implementation of any necessary adjustments. So we needed that additional 12 months for that. And so you just shifted the initial engagement for that 12-month period. And so instead of a 2-year period for the assessment, it's a 3-year period for the, and this is all maximum, right? This is a contractually agreed time. So if it's shorter than that, it's fine, but it has to be done within that period of time. So it gives us the necessary time that the vendor has asked for to be able to do their assessment. It was engaging with 3 different districts, so that.
So I know we did the RFP. We essentially had the one option.
Yes, ma'am.
If we went back out, what is, in your opinion, the likelihood that we would get someone comparable that could do it in a shorter time period?
There's an opportunity for them to do it in a shorter time period, but the 3 months that it would take us to do the solicitation and the award, we're back in the same boat.
And we aren't at risk for losing the funding to cover the cost of the disparity study.
Potentially. I mean, it's,
Yeah, we are.
So Commissioner Ellis's office secured the cost, I don't know, it was 1 or 2 million for 4 districts to be able to participate in a disparity study. I think we've got 3 ISD and a university.
I believe it's Lone Star, yes.
Right. That funding's at risk if we expand the timeline to these 3 years?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean,
Okay,
that's
my question.
That's their decision, of
Okay.
whether they want to withhold that funding, but
I thought you told.
they're very, very interested and very excited about us entering into this agreement. They want to see results so that they could potentially get additional funding to roll out other programs to other ISDs and public entities in their county. So they're pretty vested in moving forward with this.
So this amendment, if we approve it, needs to go back before Commissioners Court?
It'll go to the Commissioners Court on February 20th. In addition to Alief and Aldine, all 3 of them have their board meetings, commissioner meetings on the 20th. But ours is now, so ours would go forward so that our approved amendment would go to them for their agreement on the 20th.
And Mr. Ellison, I thought I heard that because they're very interested in doing this, they would approve the extension and our funding would not be at risk.
That's
I mean,
correct.
right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, so you're retracting what you just said before.
No,
I
I'm
think
sorry.
you
were-
misunderstood,
Okay.
Justine. 'Cause your question was a little confusing.
Okay.
I think the risk Mr. Ellison is addressing is if we were to go back out for a new RFP.
Yeah, I moved away from
we
that.
might lose.
I misunderstood your question.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
I'm lost. I'm sorry, I'm a little lost. What's the issue or concern? What are we voting on again? What's the recommendation?
Okay, so we've always, districts would like to do a disparity study. They're expensive. So some of our legislators put through a bill that was, so we have the funding, but it's gonna take longer than we anticipated, and I just wanted to make sure we don't lose the funding.
Our agreement with Harris County was for a certain period of time that we
Right.
had to get it done by this period.
Right.
But it can't get done by that period because the vendor that we're awarding to said it was gonna take a little longer. So we have to go back to Harris County to amend the agreement to allow it to be that long.
Right, and I thought that's what, I'm lost. I thought that's what we discussed last month, and we were going to go back to them.
Okay, yes, and so what we did last month is we said, we want to award with this vendor, but we didn't get the amendment yet from Harris County saying how we can change it. So we awarded to the vendor contingent upon having the amendment in place. And so what we're bringing to you tonight is the amendment itself to say, these are the changes, and then Harris County is gonna approve it on the 20th.
Okay.
I know, so I can understand your confusion.
This amendment allows us to extend the timeline just a little bit to protect that funding that Harris County has allowed.
No, I understand that part. I guess what I wasn't understanding is what the question, we're asked, are you just informing us, or are we expected to vote?
You're asked to approve the amendment now.
Okay, so we have to approve the
Tuesday.
amendment.
Yes, ma'am.
On Tuesday, okay, got you, I'm sorry.
And my initial question was around the one vendor. We didn't get a lot of response to the RFP.
You're a
so-
very qualified vendor.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item begins on page 148, and it's our monthly list of taxpayer refunds.
And there's a big one.
Yes. Let me get the number so we can talk to that one. Number 6.
No questions on that from Ms. Westbrooks?
Yes, Dr. Jensen was speaking to the one that's it's a high amount. And so the value was $8 million higher than the previous year. And so there was a protest for it, and the market data supported the taxpayer. And so we're paying the refund.
Wow. Any other questions? You can continue.
Our next item is the monthly report of cooperative purchases, and it's on page 152. And I also wanted to note that you all had a update that was at your seats for this one page. And I just wanted to point out that update was related to the police vehicles, and we had, on the original version, the unit price was swapped between the two. So you have an update for the quantity of 4 versus the quantity of 15. So that was the update that you received. And so, yes, Trustee Correa, you have been seeing these police. They've been coming through.
Any questions? You can continue. The next, We
one
can
more.
continue with your
One
next
more,
item.
yes, ma'am. Item number 7.5, which is the annual report on purchasing cooperative fees, begins on page 155. And so, of course, we utilize cooperatives where possible to leverage that buying power of the several districts that are utilizing the co-ops. And so what we have to do each year is to bring a list of all of the cooperatives that the district participates in, and more importantly, to share the fees associated with those co-ops. And if you look on page 158, it begins the listing of the cooperatives and the fees associated with it. And what you'll notice is that it doesn't cost the district to participate in the vast majority of the cooperatives. And when there is a fee, it's a nominal fee. For example, with the Central Texas Purchasing Alliance, we pay $150 a year to be a part of that cooperative. And then where we do tend to have cost is on number 13, which is on page 159. When we purchase vehicles, there's a fee associated with the purchase order. So if we purchase 12 vehicles and they're on one purchase order, we only pay one fee. But if we have multiple purchase orders, then we pay per purchase order. So again, in the look at the total cost, the cost is still fairly minimal.
Are any of these national?
There are a couple that are national. I think the one that's associated with, yes, and the one that we use.
One of them
the
says it's a
tips.
national IPA,
Yes.
number 6.
There's a few.
Okay.
Okay.
Our next item, the district has asked that be tabled to a later date. Without any objections from the body, we will table item 7.6 for Tuesday. No objections? All right, Ms. Westbrooks, you can proceed.
On page 164, thank you for that. On page 164, we have a request for proposal for glass purchase and installation. And we have 2 recommended vendors here, and both are incumbent vendors. We have one listed as our primary that we would go to first, but if there's any concern or a need for the secondary vendor, we'll have that vendor authorized as well.
Don't have any questions? Ms. Westbrooks, you can proceed to your next item.
Okay, and our next item begins on page 167, and it is the second budget review for fiscal year 2023-2024. The letter actually begins on page 169, and we're looking at each fund type and the changes in the revenues and expenditures. And starting with general fund, we have an increase of $20,376 on both the revenue and the expenditure side. That's part of it is for insurance recovery, and the other is for donations and contest fees that we've received. And then the equal offsetting cost are on the expenditure side. The use of the insurance recovery fees, the use of the UIL contest fees, and then the donation that we received from the Education Foundation that went towards the Winter Wonderland. There's no changes in revenues or appropriations in the Child Nutrition Fund, nor in the Debt Service Fund. In the special revenue funds, we did have an increase in our revenues and expenditures of a little over $900,000. And those are all related to the granting authorities and changes that have occurred as a result of roll forward and those sorts of things. With our capital projects funds, we had an increase in revenues and appropriations of just under 1.8 million, and that's all associated with interest income on the bond proceeds. With the staffing allocations, we had a net increase of 34 positions. The administrative positions decreased by 4, professional positions increased by 22, paraprofessional positions increased by 16. And I want to make a note that those positions are largely related to special education, where we've added positions to accommodate our special education population. And that was during our leveling process at the beginning of the year, or as the needs arose since then. Okay, if there are no questions, I'll move to my last item this evening, which is yes, ma'am.
Did I see something recently about a change to the Medicaid reimbursement?
Yes.
I did.
Yes, it was we put it in 2 board updates to make sure that our board was aware of what the district was dealing with. And so at the state level, there was an overzealous use of personal services for reimbursement with our school health and related services. And as a result of an audit that occurred across the state, there is a loss of funding. And for Spring ISD, our potential loss, and it's a high potential loss of funding, is $2.7 million. And so we have, and I think Dr. Atwish has left, but we have worked she's here? Yes, our special education team, working alongside our financial services team, have disagreed with the results of our cost report, and we have submitted all of the data and information as a part of the review process in order to try not to lose all of those funds, or maybe not as much as the 2.7 million, but we do realize that it's highly unlikely that those funds will be recouped. So it is a conversation that is happening across the state, and everyone is aware of it. It is not anything that school districts have done. We're on the receiving end of this error and this problem that happened. So yes, we'll keep you updated once we get a response. Okay, and so if there are no additional questions, then my last item is on page 191, and it is the annual review of our investment policy, which is CDA local. And so we are required to bring the policy to the board once per year with any proposed revisions. And so all of the revisions that are included here are fairly minor, and they align with the district's practice. It's just working alongside our investment advisors. They have suggested, and we accepted and agreed with them, some language changes that just clarify some of the practices that we already have in place. With our investments, our first and foremost goal is safety of our principal, liquidity, which is primarily the reason we use so many of the local government investment pools, because the funds are available within a day. And then lastly, yield. So when the opportunity arises, we would like to receive some interest income on our funds. So safety first, liquidity, and then yield. So all of the changes here are just language clarifications that, as I mentioned, align with our practice as we invest our funds.
The change on page 194 is very repetitive. I wondered why that was done, because it almost states the same thing 2 times in the first 2 sentences.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And so we may be able to strike the second sentence, since it does seem as though it's saying, it says it slightly differently, but it says the same thing.
Are these TASB recommended changes, or?
This is our local policy, so it's recommendations that us working in tandem with our investment advisors, just to clarify some of the language. So I see Dr. Jensen's point, and we can strike that second edition.
Help me understand why it says designee as opposed to the chief financial officer. It says superintendent or designee.
Correct, and so
To me, I would think it would be the superintendent or the CFO. Who else would it be?
So it is myself, I have that responsibility. And of course, my team, we do have a senior accountant for cash management that works with our executive director of finance. So, but the responsibility falls on myself, the superintendent ultimately.
I
So-
think the policy should be just the two of you. We wouldn't want to designate that to anyone else. Anyone else disagree? Okay.
I think if you leave it as designee, it allows the superintendent the option of not designating it. If you say the superintendent and chief financial officer, or superintendent or chief financial officer, then the board has instructed that the superintendent can't de-designate, if that makes sense, and which may be what the board
Or
wants to
maybe you
do.
can
I'm
say
just
the
explaining.
superintendent or designate it to the chief financial officer. I don't want it left open for anyone outside of those two. So however it can be worded that way, Mr. Binkley.
We can certainly work on that.
Or a rationale for
Why?
the
Right, that my first question is why are we saying?
So what we can do is compare it to legal and
Okay.
see if maybe that's where the language originated. So we can take,
My guess is, and it may be, but, at one time, we were going in and putting in or designee in a lot of places. And I know in some of the policies, we've actually started pulling that out because the superintendent can designate as long as it's not statutorily restricted. I think the or designee doesn't mean that anybody can come in and say, I'm the designee. The superintendent still has to state, this is the person who is the designee to do this. So it's not just anybody could do it, right? Dr. H certainly would not designate me to be the person in this because I am not a money person.
I would like for our local policy to stipulate our CFO or our superintendent.
Okay.
We're talking about our investments and, yeah.
we'll make those two adjustments and bring it back on Tuesday?
Sure.
Yes, okay, thank you. Madam President, that is my last item for this evening.
All right, thank you, Ms. Westbrooks. For our next item, I'd like to recognize our Chief of Innovation and Student Success, Dr. Matthew Parasol.
Thank you, President Durant. This item can be found on page 204 of your packet. This is a memorandum of understanding between Texas A&M University and Spring ISD. I want to bring you back to our December board meeting, which I know it seems like an eternity ago. But we had brought an MOU forward with ExxonMobil, a new partnership involving STEM, where our students are going to be given the opportunity across our high schools to be transported after school to a STEM lab, be taught, and allowed to engage in a lot of hands-on activities. As well as learning along with their teachers at high school. That full grant was over $1 million that we received through that. Part of that included middle school support, right? How do we help build our STEM students and STEM programs at middle school and helps prepare our students as they move into high school? So this agreement piggybacks that agreement that we had in December. This is ExxonMobil is directly contracted with A&M, and this one allows us to utilize the benefit of that funding they're providing to A&M for our teachers. So if you look on page 213, there's actually a flyer that summarizes this. And you can see that In Spring ISD, our teachers will be able to apply. We have 7 teacher spots that we'll be able to utilize. We're going to prioritize 6th grade math teachers, but we also may consider Algebra 1 as well, and 7 and 8 teachers. So those teachers will be selected, will apply, then working with our principal recommendations in our district, we'll identify those middle school teachers to go through the program. They will receive monthly training through A&M, as well as 2 summer institutes, and they'll be paid $7,000 during the summer to attend as well, and they'll end up with a certification, graduate certification from A&M in the area of STEM. So this directly aligns to our strategic plan, specifically in the area of our leadership pipeline, leadership development, and teacher effectiveness for student outcomes.
Good one.
I did professional development for many years, and I will tell you that this is beautifully designed. And in full disclosure, Janet Meyer, one of the directors there, was my office mate at Texas A&M when I was doing PhD work, and she is a former teacher from Westfield. She taught environmental science there. There was just one thing I wanted to ask about on page 207. You have a word I haven't heard. It's NG. Is that nung? I'm sure it's something. It's a typo, right? It's under 1.3.1. The last sentence. Work in good faith in regarding to NUNG programs.
Oh, yes, I believe that is a typo, and thank you for catching that. We will let A&M know and get that updated. Thank you.
Will the A&M professional development, trainers come to the campus?
So they're still working on the details, but it would be a location within our area.
Okay.
We're part of the possibilities. It could be here directly, but what they would really like to do is have them come to that STEM center that they're building at Exxon, because then they're getting experience with some of that STEM equipment.
I'm hoping they got to do that. Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? You good? All right, thank you, Dr. Parasol. For our next item, I'd like to recognize our General Counsel, Jeremy Binkley.
Good evening. Tonight I have 2 resolutions for you. The first one you'll find on page 214. Resolution regarding school closures due to the winter storm. The strategic plan priority area that this focuses on is well-being. And unfortunately, by this time, we've gotten pretty used to weather resolutions, right? So we had to close on January 16th due to ice in the area and poor weather. And this resolution will allow us to pay our employees for that closure. We certainly have enough minutes built into our schedule that we don't have to make up that day instructionally.
Okay.
If there are no questions on that one, if you'll go to page 217 with me. This is a resolution of the board to accept chaplains as volunteers. Our strategic plan priority focus area on this is engagement and well-being. And as you know, at Spring ISD, we have an incredible long-standing partnership with our area religious leaders through our ministerial alliance. I know we have monthly meetings. I know Miss Carol, who's probably not with us tonight, leads that up for us and has done an amazing job with that partnership. Those partners provide mentoring, support, and other programs to our students. What this resolution does is based on SB 763, reaffirms what we're already doing with these partners, allowing chaplains and other religious leaders to engage with our students as volunteers, to provide them support, to provide them mentoring, and to provide them the other programs that we've already been doing for quite some time.
Wouldn't they just have to go through the same process as typical volunteers?
Yes.
Like why, what's the purpose of designating? It's, okay.
Because there's a Senate bill that has no enforcement mechanism, but we are going to play nice.
Okay.
And reaffirm what we're already doing, because, we have this amazing partnership and.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Sorry, that might have been a little too frank. I apologize.
Hopefully, we also encourage rabbis and imams.
Does that have
And
to
it
be on
says
the
as long as
consent
they
agenda?
meet eligible requirements applicable to the district volunteers, so it's all in there.
I don't, I need this one pulled from the consent agenda.
Okay. Do you have concerns regarding it?
I'm not gonna be bullied by the legislature into doing this. So I'm a no vote likely for this. So I need it pulled.
Okay, we can pull it from consent.
I just had a question about the minutes built in. So we had enough minutes built in to where we only had the resolution, but when I saw that, it prompted me to think, it's good that we have the minutes built in, but are we overbuilding time on our kids? I know it's a bigger question, but
It is, we're not really overbuilding. We have, from where we were 8 years ago, we've added 10 minutes to the day. And so you have small chunks of time that actually end up adding a little over 2 full days of instruction. So it's not really building more time for the kids. It's actually really accounting for all the transition time, the restroom time, the passing time, things like that. But we haven't done that. Remember, we piloted it with the iZone campuses, doing that extended day, adding more time to the day and to the calendar. And they didn't want it. So a lot of districts have done that. We are not doing that. So it's just a few minutes built in every single day to give us enough time in the whole year for 2 weather makeup days.
And it didn't show any gains either
Exactly.
in doing the extended day.
That is it for my items.
All right,
Thank
so
you.
we will pull the second item, the resolution, to accept chaplains as volunteers from the consent agenda.
Yes, Madam
Thank you,
President.
Mr. Binkley. Our next item, I'd like to recognize our Chief District of Operations, Mark Miranda.
Thank you, President Durant, members of the board, superintendent. I'm on page 219. This is a recommendation that the board approve the cost to set up 3 portable buildings at Marshall Elementary School. This project will allow the newly moved portables to be utilized as 6 classrooms for the campus, and will include the permitting of these portable buildings to include ramps, air conditionings, awnings, electrical data and exterior painting, and of course, all of the permitting includes ADA and occupancy for these buildings.
It's a one-time cost.
This is a one-time cost.
That's a lot of money.
Did we research, how much would it cost to just buy brand new portables?
Considerably more.
Well,
Don't they have one? How many do they have right now? I drive past there every day, I can't.
These are, how many do they have now?
Outside, right?
These are just the 3. Only
No, I
these.
mean, there's no portables out there right now?
These 3.
Oh, you're
They're-
saying these are the 3
These
that
3
we're
are
going to
currently there.
refurbish?
Right, they're currently there and they need to be set up to be able to be classrooms.
Oh, so they're just there right now?
Correct.
We just moved them there from Clark Primary, because as you know, their growth, it continues to expand. And so we moved them there using federal funds, and now we've got to get them up to code so
Got
that
it.
they can actually use them.
So even with the rezoning, there's still need?
Yes, ma'am. The numbers, right now, they're okay, but they're a little tight. And we know that the families are coming, both to Burchett and Marshall, to that area. And so, we moved about 80 students over. So we reduced them from the 900, I was looking at the numbers, 982 is where they were last year, and so they're at 800 70 some odd students, 880 students, so we reduced them. But there's still a lot of space that they used to use for collaboration that they're having to, transfer into classrooms. So moving these 3 portables or 6 classrooms will allow them to have a little bit more space. And it would probably be like a grade level that comes out there and give them more room.
I'm just
I know it's
wondering
a
at
lot.
what point do I taught in portables and it's
I know.
not ideal.
It is not the best.
Whether you can't really monitor the kids as well, and so at what point do we make other plans instead of
Right,
putting them outside?
So we did, definitely rezone, and that was
Right.
hard. I know you all remember last year, the meetings, the parent meetings, and, it was hard, and so that we will continue to monitor.
Okay.
And, some teachers love portables because they have more autonomy. It's
You control
always
your own
difficult.
air.
Yes, you have your own air and your own heat, and, principals don't go out as
No,
often
they
to
don't,
that
especially when it's
T-building.
bad weather.
That's right. That's right. So, yeah, we don't want, and I know, a beautiful building, and then you put portables, right? So we will continue. That's one of the things that Mr. Miranda and his team do every year. We continue to review our demographic numbers. Remember Rocky comes, and so if the need arises now, Smith Elementary is healthy. We've filled it up. The same thing with Anderson. They're healthy now. If we need to expand, we need to consider other elementary schools and kind of spread it out a little bit more. But we'll definitely be bringing that data at the beginning of the year. Once we do our snapshot in October, we'll bring back data to see if we need to make any other adjustments.
Did we only get 3 vendors on this bid?
Yes. One was a no bid.
One was the no, yeah, 0.
Right.
So 2 vendors.
The other vendor was 200,000 above this vendor, so.
Have we ever considered renting or leasing portables as an option?
No, not really, because we'd still have to move them, place them, and then set them up with permitting. So, considering that we do have empty T buildings in our at our campuses, it's easier to do this.
Your next item?
I turned off my mic. I forgot I had one more item. Sorry about that. The next item is on page 221. We have the intruder detection. So next Tuesday in closed session, we will invite Chief Rodrigue to be in closed session with us, and we will have one item to present in closed session.
Thank you. Okay. With that, we'll have that item in closed session. We'll also hear from our internal auditor on Tuesday. Because of the length of tonight's meeting, we elected not to have a closed session and do that on Tuesday. At this time, given that there's no additional items on tonight's agenda, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Madam President, I move that we adjourn tonight's meeting of the Spring Independent School District Board of Trustees.
Second.
It's been moved by trustee Hodges and seconded by trustee McDaniel that we adjourn tonight's meeting. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Tonight's meeting adjourns at 9:54 p.m. I will ask if you guys can join me in the back for just a few minutes.